going to hang out for about 3 more minutes for our next commission to come in. All right, team, let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Steph Ralph. I will be your chair for this edition, April 14th, of the Portland Planning Commission. In person, actually, we are all in person who are in person. We have Commissioner Ames, Commissioner Alvarado, Vice Chair Spivak, myself, Vice Chair Pollack, and Commissioner Moreno Mera. And today is Columbia Corridor and Industrial Lands Environmental Overlay Zone and the Economic Opportunity Analysis. And curate any items of interest from commissioners? Okay. Then we'll pass it straight over to Chief Planner Diefendorfer for the director's report.
Thank you so much, Chair Routh. Good afternoon, commissioners. Nice to see you after a small break. So thank you for being here. And we do have a few commissioners who let us know that they were not going to be able to join today. But we do have quorum, just for the record. So thank you. Just a few quick items wanted to share. You all received an email from Autumn you received many emails from Autumn, sorry. But among them, you received an email about the draft BPS strategic plan that is circulating right now. And we wanted to just remind you and invite you to provide any comments that you might have on that document. It's still being sort of reviewed internally, so there's still a little bit of time, but please do give us your thoughts if you have any that you'd like to be considered and reflected in the document. We have been talking about having a social event, and Autumn circulated a couple of dates, and I think the greatest availability was, or for people's schedules, was the May 12th date. So we are going to, and we also thought that was convenient because the commission will be meeting and then we can have a social shortly thereafter at a location here in downtown proximate to, where we are now, so that, or not necessarily directly where we are now, but just for convenience, since you all will be here anyway. And we look forward to that gathering to celebrate some of the work that we've been doing recently. So please mark your calendars, and Autumn will send out additional details. The location is still being we're still trying to look at possible locations, so we will let you know. Finally, or a couple more small things. Chair Routh has convened a small group to draft the transmittal letter for the CEI Hub policy project, as we agreed upon as a group at the last meeting, and that draft will be soon circulated to the rest of the commissioners for any final review, thoughts, input. So stay tuned for that. We will send that along shortly to you. And then the last thing I wanted to mention was, I believe that Autumn just a few minutes ago shared an email that Commissioner Knowles shared with her to be distributed to you all. Since he cannot be here today for this work session, he just wanted to share some of his overarching policy considerations that he's hoping that you all will consider as you continue to hear about the CCIL projects and the EOA. So I think that concludes my any updates that I have. Happy to turn it back over to you or answer any questions. Chair Routh, thank you.
Cool, Vance, thank you. Any questions, thoughts, comments? All right, thank you. We whiz on to our big action item of the day, which is the consent agenda, which is the March 10th meeting minutes. Would anyone like to move to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Thank you, Vice Chair Pollock. Second? Brave soul. Second. Thank you, Commissioner Ames. All in favor? Okay, great. And that carries. And with that, we'll go into our first work session, which is the Columbia Corridor and Industrial Lands Environmental Overlay Zone. And to that end, Jeff Cottle and Daniel Subbing, thank you so much for joining us. Take us where you will.
Red means on. Okay, good. I guess to just kick off, I'll introduce myself, and maybe Daniel can quickly introduce himself before we get started. So I'm Jeff Cottle. You see him pronouns, and I manage the River Environmental Team at the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, and we are kind of working on this project at the Columbia Corridor and a few other projects, properties within the city.
And I'm Daniel Sobing. I'm an environmental planner at the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. Also, he, him pronouns.
You want to go on? So thanks for having us back again. And I guess this is where we get into the real nitty gritty of things. So this is the agenda for today. It has been a little bit of a while since we met. So we thought we'd do another little recap of the project itself, just kind of the basics. We'll go through that quickly. And then we provided you with 3 different memos. Again, as a reminder of what our focus today primarily is, largely other than any other questions that you might have, is responding. We have done a thorough review of all of the testimony that we've received, and specifically today is about site-specific testimony. So as you can imagine, a significant number of people property owners within the project area had provided testimony. And so we have gone through, there were some, in our last session, we reviewed some of those sort of high-level themes within the testimony, but this is really getting to what we have come to as a result of looking through all that testimony, evaluating different sites. So there was Memo 1, which is really focused on kind of general. So based on the review of the site-specific testimony, what we thought would apply to kind of broader geographies more than just really looking at individual sites where there might be issues or things to address. And then we had memos 2A and 2B, which really does get into those nitty-gritty. And provided you with our specific assessment of the proposals within each of those individual sites. So in some cases, the testimony is from multiple people, or there could be multiple pieces of testimony from a given individual on that individual site. But so we wanted to provide you with so that is really the recommendations that we have come to related to those site-specific requests that are in there. And so I will do the little recap here, and then I'll just hand it over to Daniel to go through those different sets of recommendations that we have. And then in terms of what we think is the appropriate response to the various testimony that we received, we will continue that discussion because we had, something over 80 different pieces of testimony. We didn't want to overwhelm you with too much information within the time frame, so we will continue with other site-specific and really geography-focused, although the Port of Portland is one of those considerations, but in the next work session as well. So those site-specific discussions will be carried over into the next work session. And then we'll open for questions, and we'll provide enough time with each step along the way in the presentation to have questions and discussion. So just a reminder what the project is. So this map shows, again, it's the Columbia Corridor Industrial Lands E-Zone project area, largely focused on the industrial areas. There is some commercial and residential land within that corridor between the Columbia Slough and the Columbia River, and obviously there's some residential on Hayden Island as well, which is included. But these areas, as a reminder, were parts of the city that were removed from the E-Zone map correction project, which was adopted in 2022. Specifically because of the preponderance of industrial land in the area. So we're really kind of coming back to these areas that were pulled out, and that's why we're also, because of the preponderance of industrial lands, that's why we're going along with the economic opportunities analysis to make sure that we're accounting for any of these proposals that are in this project. So as a reminder, fundamentally, that first bullet is what this project is about. It is really looking at moving forward, once this project is adopted, where will environmental zones apply? And we have not, in a lot of cases, have not revisited this area in 20, 30, in some cases almost 40 years. And so this is an opportunity at its core to determine, especially within the context of the industrial development, where and to what extent around natural resources will environmental zones apply. Beyond that, there's a handful of zoning code amendments, sort of technical amendments, and that's one piece that we'll address, kind of what the specific zoning code amendments separate from those site-specific mapping changes and things like that. We will be replacing, there are a number, and one of the benefits of this project is that we will be replacing a collection of natural resource management documents and consolidating it into this project, the CCIL E-Zone project. So we'll talk briefly about that in the review. And then again, like I said, so this is all going along with the economic opportunities analysis to make sure that those are accounted for in terms of our projections for economic development land. So this is thus far, we all know this is where we've been. We're briefing in December, public hearing on January 13th with written testimony open until February 3rd. During that time, we were also doing site visits to confirm natural resources. as well as a team. We had a work session in February, the 24th, and then we're here today. So yeah, we had said here, as you can see here, 84 pieces of written testimony. 32 individuals testified orally. Some of those same people who submitted written testimony also provided oral testimony. And as I had mentioned, in many cases, there were multiple pieces of testimony on individual site. So just in terms of a little bit of context as a reminder, we have been planning for natural resources for a very long time, basically 30 plus years at this point. And again, many of these areas within the Columbia Corridor are going back to the 80s and 90s when we applied regulations. So they are in need of updating. As I said, at different times along the way, we've updated regulations elsewhere in the city. And in 2022, we had the E-zone map correction project, which really had a similar effort of determining what were the buffers going to be around natural resources, but really addressing the rest of the city. Next slide. So these are as I said, you can see there's, I think, within the actual corridor itself, whatever, 5 of those are all in the corridor itself. So there's a lot of kind of overlapping natural resource protection direction that applies in the corridor. So that's what, like I said, a benefit of this project is we'll replace that and have the Columbia Corridor Industrial Lands Project as the guiding document for all of these natural resource management plan, as a natural resource management plan. There are also existing plans for Johnson Creek and the East Butte Terraces and Northwest Hills that will also be replaced as a part of this project as well. That's those miscellaneous other properties that are outside of the corridor. And again, to get to that, this is my favorite slide, as I think I said last time, but this kind of tells you really what we're asking in terms of that, what is the application of the environmental zone? So one of the questions is, do we apply the conservation zone or the protection zone? As we've talked about in the past, protection zone is our most strict environmental zone that really very limited amount of development can happen there. It really has to show that there's a public benefit in that protection overlay zone. Conservation zone is much more permissive and allows for development as long as impacts are avoided, minimized, and then mitigated if they can't be. And so really it's, what are we applying? C zone and P zone. And then when we are between those, are we saying what is the buffer that's around those natural resources? Number 2 there. So really, what is the size of the protection zone and what is the extent of the conservation zone, et cetera? And that's really the question here. Yes, Eli.
The prior slide before that one with all the plans that are being retired. I assume many of these plans, I'm not familiar with them, but many of them have land use components to them. But sometimes plans have other components too, like aspirations for the community. Like, I guess I'm wondering whether we lose anything, because this project do we lose anything by retiring? And the other is there any formal action taken to repeal an old plan?
I believe they'll be in the ordinance that we're repealing and replacing.
I'm sorry, Patricia Diefenhofer for the record. Just to clarify, these are not plans in the way we think about like community or area plans. These are plans specifically related to natural resources and the approaches to, where the resources are, what types of resources. So it's more of like an inventory. So I don't believe we lose anything. And I think all of the ones that are listed on that list that part of your actions, and I don't know if we have that slide at the bottom of this particular presentation, but there have been previous presentations where we've listed out the actions that you as a commission will be taking as it relates to this project. And one of those actions is to repeal and replace these documents. So you are taking that action by doing that. And maybe, Jeff, could you just explain a little bit more? There's 5 or 6 or 7 or 8, I can't, different documents here. And what does it mean to, can you describe for the commission a little bit more what it is that we're actually doing? Are we actually consolidating them? Are we just replacing them, but they still retain their individual geographies? Maybe you could just
acknowledging that we're repealing things we've never read, so I just don't know what it is. We're losing here, like, if there's lists of species, then maybe we still want to have that, even with zoning, that makes sense?
Can I also just add very quickly that I believe that they were part of appendices on this project. So they were provided to you, and the changes that were being, and Jeff, maybe you could correct me here and make sure I'm saying this correctly. they were part of, I think it was Appendix C, if I'm recalling correctly, or volume.
I'm sorry, which-
3. These plans were shared as part of this project, right? These documents were shared with the commission.
No, these weren't shared. The volume 2 is a replacement of these documents. And to, I guess what I would say, I'm
That's what-
sorry if I missed, so all of these are, like as Patricia said, these are really about natural resource plans. So it really largely is focused on that. There are a couple situations, like the Columbia South Shore, there still will be some requirements that are part of the Columbia South Shore Plan District that are more what you're saying. And what are the other considerations within the Columbia South Shore? For example, we have archaeological resources there. We're not changing anything with that. So these are really, we are just replacing the previous, to what Patricia said, the inventories, the evaluation of impacts, which we are doing, is also in volume 2. What does it mean for different types of uses? And, where we're looking at the conflicts that would result, and that's part of the ESCE analysis that basically says, okay, if we applied protections here, what does it mean for these different types of uses? And then the direction on how that then is translated to the environmental zone. So this is all the background information, and with the Columbia Core, the CCILE zone project, we're really updating all that information to make it more up to date in terms of all the data and inventories and everything else. And then also, as we were talking about, just in terms of those questions about E-zone application, really we're saying we're making those decisions anew and saying what is the protection we're going to apply. All of these went through that same process because these are the documents, the sort of background documents for which we comply with Goal 5, which is what we are doing with this project as well, which is about natural resource protection and other cultural resources and other things.
Well, that's what I hope the answer was. That's great.
So just as a reminder, we've kind of broken this down, and we weren't going to go into the details of all that. We went through the sort of more site or sort of area-specific protection decisions that we had in a past session. But just as a reminder, this is our baseline that we started with. It basically says the proposed E-zone would be a 50 apply the protection zone to all the resources, the streams, the sloughs, and wetlands. And then, or wetlands at least within 50 feet of any waterways, and then a 50-foot protection zone buffer around those resources. And then the conservation zone would apply beyond that protection zone, any area that we defined through our natural resource inventory as a high or medium ranked riparian resource. For wetlands, which we're kind of referring to as isolated wetlands that are greater than 50 feet from waterways, from streams, and other waterways, so slough, et cetera, we would apply the conservation zone, which again is more permissive. And then for a conservation zone to the area within 170 feet of the ordinary high water mark on the Columbia Slough, lower Columbia Slough, and the Columbia River, we only apply to those two areas because that's where the FEMA biological opinion identified the potential for threatened and endangered species that are subject to that biological opinion. And so, for example, fish can't get to the middle and upper slough, so they don't apply. And so those are really any of the floodplains that are behind the levees, which a lot of the area in the Columbia Corridor is behind a levee. We are not applying just to meet the biological opinion. It's really the lower slough and the Columbia River where these apply. And then this is really the area-specific natural resource protections. We went through that, and if you have any questions about that, we have a slide that we can go through what they were. But in some cases, specifically like along the Columbia River, there's already we made some different determinations utilizing that ESCE analysis. That's what the purpose of it is that you evaluate particular areas. We break the area into resource sites. And then we evaluate those resource sites for protections based on that evaluation, that ESCE evaluation. So this map highlights some of the different areas that we have an area-specific ESCE determination. Some of them just continuing agreements that we've had. So the Portland International Airport and the Portland International Center, we have existing agreements with the Port of Portland that we maintained, for example. The others were more specific to the character of those given areas. And that is the purview of all of you as well, to change, to to make those decisions based on the ESE. So, and before I hand it over to Daniel, so just quickly so we had these bullets just summarize, there aren't a ton of actual zoning code changes amendments that are part of the proposed draft. But basically, we wanted to highlight what's in there, so then we'll move into the staff recommended additional amendments that you would evaluate and determine whether you think are appropriate. So first thing is, per the biological opinion, since we really adopted some of our other requirements throughout the city, there is a standards approach, a more prescriptive approach for meeting the floodplain requirements within that 170 feet. And so we're incorporating those requirements for that 170 feet and allowing for those to be met through standards, not have to go through land use review. If you can't do that, you would still be able to be approved through land use review. Updated lighting regulations, really to be consistent, what we already have in the river overlay zone, just sort of modern lighting techniques and specifications carrying those over. And so those first two categories, we do have some recommended amendments, staff recommended amendments based on testimony that we received. There's some things related to rights of way, and I'll let Daniel cover those if you have any questions about that. That's in there. We aren't recommending any additional changes to that in these sites, sort of based on testimony. And then for the Columbia South Shore, the proposal in the proposed draft, the existing proposal, is to essentially delete the environmental regulations that are in the Columbia South Shore and then apply the environmental overlay zone that applies elsewhere in the city, so that it's more consistent with what is applied elsewhere. And, a lot of the environmental requirements that were developed for the South Shore were done when there wasn't a whole lot of development in the South Shore. It was really expecting, we're talking about 20 years now, it was really getting prepared for additional development within that once agricultural area. And so they don't necessarily always fit so well with how we do things now, and also with the current development that is existing at this point. So with this shift, we don't reduce protections, but we're just allowing for a more, understood, user-friendly process. And then we've also, as we discussed in previous sessions, we have made some modifications. That's one of those area-specific ESEE determinations, so that we are sure that we are continuing the level of protection that exists now. If you remember, that was adding at least a 25-foot transition area to where existing E-zones were, so that we are sure that we're keeping at least those areas that are currently in the E-zone protected to the same level that it exists currently. We are not, in these sort of staff recommended amendments, aren't asking for any consideration of any amendments to that Columbia South Shore. So, any questions on any of that sort of starting point? And then I can let Daniel move through some of our staff recommended amendments. Yeah.
Just curious, my understanding of this is this will be all for new development, like lighting and all the other things will be applicable, not backwards.
That's correct. Everything, basically all of what we're considering here, the regulations, and we're applying new E-zones to somewhere, it's all moving forward. Non-conforming development can continue, as we've discussed in the past. Operation, maintenance, all of that sort of, even replacement to us, as long as you're staying within the same building footprint for an existing development that's, say, in the protection overlay zone, can stay there, can be replaced, can continue to work. It's just a question about when there is expansion of the development or new development is proposed. Yeah. Okay, with that I'll pass it. I don't know who's controlling that, but when they talk, I think it does.
All right, so I will continue, and our slide will appear at some point. But I'm going to start with staff recommended code amendments. And so, as Jeff alluded to, there's a couple of those code amendments that were part of the proposed draft package that we're proposing to amend further. And so I want to go over that. And I'm going to stop multiple times throughout this presentation for questions, comments, and discussions. So feel free to jump in at any time, and we can answer any questions.
Sorry. Is the idea that we're gonna, you're seeking us to make motions and vote on these? Or this is just information for votes to happen in another day, or? tell me.
We're not asking the commission to make any, take any votes today. We're just teeing up the conversation for next, not the next meeting, but probably the meeting after. I think it's the May 12th meeting. So we just want you to understand all of the different, the proposed plan itself, and then the staff's recommended further amendments, whether it be to code or to the map with site-specific locations.
But if you're thinking about additional amendments or if things come up that you think you want to amend during this discussion, we would be happy to take direction on that and come back to you with additional proposals. We're going to be back in 2 weeks on the 28th and then on the 12th, so we'll be considering that as we move forward.
And I think what I would say to us, basically what we want to get to is that May 12th, we'll have the full collection of proposed amendments that you all will be considering. We'll have a package that we'll evaluate on the 12th to determine and have that official vote. Yeah, that would be the hope.
All right, so these are the 3 code amendments that we want to discuss today. These were all covered in memo number 1 that we provided to you last week. And so based on feedback that we got on manufactured home parks, there was a request that we exempt the replacement of manufactured homes because changes to E-zone regulations could potentially impact that. And so we'll go into detail on that on the next slide. And then the riparian buffer area, so Jeff described that. It's the portion of the floodplain that's within 170 feet of the lower Columbia Slough and the Columbia River outside of the levee system. There were a couple of sites where that was inappropriately being applied outside of the area where it should have been applied. And so that was raised in some testimony. We reviewed it and we're recommending a change to the E-zone application on those sites where it would be inappropriate to apply the riparian buffer area.
Actually, that's just for clarity.
Actually,
That's not actually what this is
Sorry.
about. This is, we have a slide, so why don't we just go ahead? But this is specifically about the biological opinion requires, there's habitat requirements for improvements basically within that 170 feet if you're proposing development. In the biological opinion, there's an allowance where if it's river dependent, river related, they call it water dependent, water related. But if that is the use type, if it's a river dependent, river related use, it does not need to meet the habitat mitigation requirements. And so this is a clarification really that within those standards that we have where you're allowed to meet those mitigation requirements without going through land use review, we had neglected to identify that river dependent, river related uses are not subject to those requirements. So this is a clarification that that is the case. We have we have a site-specific discussion about something that is what Daniel was talking about in terms of the application of the riparian buffer area, but that's not what this is about.
Preview of a later discussion.
Yeah.
And then exterior lighting requirements, and we'll get into that as well too in a couple slides. So starting with the manufactured home parks. So conservation zone is being applied, and it's on the basis of where the floodplain is mapped within 170 feet of the Columbia River. There happens to be a manufactured home park on Hayden Island, and much of that manufactured home park is within the floodplain. So based on the biological opinion where we're applying the conservation zone would be intersecting with a number of existing manufactured homes in that park.
Another further clarification, it's actually not that much of the manufactured home park within the Columbia River, along the Columbia River. There's portions, small portions of the manufactured home park, and there's 2 manufactured home parks on Hayden Island, but specifically, and both of them have a little bit of floodplain on them, but it's not terribly extensive. Maybe the one on the south is a little more in terms of percentage, but it's actually just portions of the manufactured home parks are within the floodplain.
But that results in about a dozen existing manufactured homes being within the conservation zone, give or take. And there are existing exemptions that allow for the replacement of existing buildings and structures. So there's a stipulation within that exemption that it has to be the exact same building footprint. If you change the building footprint or expand, that exemption doesn't apply. And the issue that was raised by the operators of that manufactured home park is that there's a finite lifespan to a manufactured home. When they reach that lifespan, it's very difficult to renovate them or restore them. They really need to be replaced. And older floor plans from the 70s and 80s are not consistent with modern designs, and it's very difficult to customize your manufactured home floor plan. They come out with a set specification for what the floor plan looks like. So when you do a replacement, it's really impossible to meet that exemption. And then because manufactured homes are a deeply affordable housing typology that the city of Portland has opted to protect through the application of the RMP zone, we feel it's appropriate to exempt the replacement of existing manufactured homes within existing manufactured home parks. So if it's a one-for-one replacement within an existing disturbance area, you shouldn't be subject to the environmental review and the mitigation requirements that would come along with the code otherwise. And so that's one proposal.
Before we move on, so that, as I think we've discussed in the past, it's very similar to how we approach floating homes. That was in the sort of summary of the testimony that we received. It's so for floating homes, we sort of view the slip as long as you're replacing the floating home within an existing slip. We allow for it, basically the exemption applies to the replacement of that floating home within an existing slip. In this case, we're sort of using the same corollary for manufactured home parks. They have an established disturbance area, as Daniel said, and it's really the replacement, minor changes to the extent of those manufactured homes when they're replaced. And so it's kind of similar in the way that we would apply the code.
And so this is the next set of, or the next, actually, is there any discussion of that before we move on to the next amendment?
I'm just confirming, is there a square footage maximum set on the replacement manufactured home? No.
There's not.
And that applies to floating homes as well, as long as they stay within the slips? Okay, thank you.
And so, as Jeff corrected me on this is a exemption, or not exemption, there are standards that we are adding to the code to allow for development to happen within E-zones within the floodplain. So currently, and since the adoption of the floodplain resiliency plan a few years ago, if you are in a floodplain and in the E-zone and you propose new development or expansions of development, as the code currently reads, you would automatically be subject to environmental review in all circumstances. And so we are creating a set of standards that allow development to avoid environmental review in many instances. But along with those standards comes a requirement to do some site enhancements. But when reviewing the FEMA biological opinion, FEMA's implementation recommendations are to exempt river-related and river-dependent uses from those requirements to do the site enhancements. We didn't include that exclusion for those river-dependent, river-related uses in our proposed draft. That was a mistake on our part. And so when we realized that we forgot to add that exclusion, we realized that we needed to create an exemption or a exception to those standards so that river-dependent, river-related uses can occur by standards within the E-zones, and they're not subject to those site enhancement requirements that non-river-dependent development would be otherwise subject to. Is that clear? It's a little convoluted. We explained it in some detail in the memo as well, too, if there was anything that was confusing about that. Okay, and then the third code amendment that we're proposing is about lighting requirements. So as we told you at the last meeting, we are updating and modernizing our lighting requirements in the E-zone code. We're making them, for one, consistent with the river environmental overlay, and two, just more consistent with standard practices for how lighting is done, and making them more environmentally sensitive. So we are proposing a couple of things that could potentially impact marine industrial in that. And one is that we are saying you can't shine your lights directly into a water body. That's consistent with what the River E says. It's good for habitat, but that's a problem for marine industrial facilities where they need to have lights that are shining on ships that are actively being loaded and unloaded. And so we already created an exemption for marine industrial, for river-dependent industrial, for that light shining into the water aspect, and that was in response to feedback that we got from the Port of Portland. But then we got additional testimony from the port saying that the color temperature restrictions could also be problematic, that they typically are using. So our proposal is if you're doing lights in the E-zone, it needs to be 3000 K, which is a less blue-rich light. It's warmer, more yellows and reds, less blues. It's really much better for environmental habitat, for human responses to circadian rhythms. And it's also good for migratory fish, so it's really important, but it's problematic because for industrial settings, a slightly higher color temperature is generally industry standard practice. And so the Port of Portland has 4,000 K lights on some of them, like Terminal 6 is really the big issue, is that their existing lighting there, they're using either a mix of 3,000 K and then in some instances 4,000 K lights. And they requested that we create a separate standard that only applies to river-dependent industrial uses that would allow for the use of 4,000 K lighting. The other thing that they noted in their the Port of Portland noted in their testimony is that the current code says all the lighting needs to be below 3,000 K. And our proposal was consistent with the existing wording in the code, but they pointed out, so they pointed out that most lighting is around 3,000 K, so eliminating the requirement that lighting be below 3,000 K and saying it could be at 3,000 K and meet that standard.
Question, so is 4K, according to the port, what they are currently using or what they need to use? I'm just curious, like, how much of it is, we've always done it this way, or this is how we need to do it, you know what I mean?
No, this is based, and they did provide a resource, and we have, the BPS has worked on sort of lighting impacts and dark skies, as some of you were involved, dark skies sort of approaches to lighting. And so we did, based on their input, we did research to look at the viability and how, relevant this request for 4,000 K for different color temperature was for industrial. And it does see, and it's actually, there is a dark skies report that related to industrial that recommends that 4,000 K. And so it's not just in response to the port. They raised the issue, and it is something that they're considering, a consideration for them at Terminal 6, but it's based on looking into that, doing additional research to confirm that that's actually an appropriate level of the color temperature. Yeah.
They also said in their testimony that it's work site lighting. The rest of their lighting is within that 3,000 K threshold, and that they dim those lights during non-operational hours, which is consistent with the recommendations of Dark Sky International for marine terminals, that for workplace lighting during operational hours is appropriate for that higher level, but it's better to be lower in other times.
Thank you. A gal's got to ask.
All right, so let's move into staff amendments. And again, this is broken up into a couple sections. So first we have mapping amendments that are more holistic, applying to multiple sites. And then we have finally a section that's about site-specific responses. So we'll start with those more broader geography level mapping amendments. And so we have one mapping amendment that would apply to residential sites in the East Columbia neighborhood. We have one that applies specifically to Port of Portland sites. We have another that applies to sites that are built into the levee on Marine Drive that front on the Columbia River. And then that last bullet, the last two bullets is referring to those site-specific amendments. So we'll go through those one by one. So the first one is in the East Columbia neighborhood. And so for our project, that's resource site CC7 and CC8. And in that neighborhood, there's a fair amount of our lower density residential, single dwelling residential zoning, R10, R20, and RF. And we got a fair amount of testimony from homeowners in that specific geography in that neighborhood. And then Jeff and I also attended a meeting at the East Columbia Neighborhood Association last month to get more feedback on what we were hearing from homeowners in that area. And from what we've heard, the proposed draft E-zones could be restrictive of uses on some residential sites, and that's because the platting of a lot of subdivisions that were done 20 or 30 years ago puts tax lots right next to the resources. There's wetlands, there's a network of streams and sloughs that kind of intertwine through this neighborhood and are located very close to some of the residential areas. And you can see that on the slide here. You can see that everything that's illustrated in yellow there is a residential zone site. You can see that some of those tax lot boundaries are right next to wetlands, streams, sloughs.
It's actually the green area, but.
Sorry, I'm colorblind. I apologize.
Daniel's colorblind, so it apparently looks yellow to him, but to us it's green.
I can't tell from this image. Are most of those tax lots developed, or there's just some developer like split it off and hoping they're selling the same day?
Most of it is developed. There are some large tracts that are resource tracts that were set aside when those subdivisions were done. In some cases, like our code for land division requires a 15-foot buffer when you do that resource tract. So E-zones are usually 50 feet when you do the land division code, they're 15 feet. In some cases, they didn't actually get a full 15-foot buffer for whatever reason. So in some cases, these homes are like right next to the resources. There are a handful of developable lots that are vacant as well too, but most of them are developed lots where it's an existing home that the buffer would go over the home potentially. And so in response to the testimony that we heard, we are recommending a change to the resource protection decisions that apply to that site. And currently those sites are in the baseline in the proposed draft, and so we would be moving them out of the baseline into one of these area geographies that has a site-specific ESE decision. And so currently we're proposing 50-foot buffers that would apply to all streams, all sloughs, wetlands within 50 feet of streams and sloughs. We'd be going from a 50-foot buffer down to a 25-foot buffer. So the P-zone would shrink from 50 feet to 25 feet. The remaining area that used to be P-zone would now become C-zone. So there would be a C-zone would be applied between 25 and 50 feet instead of that 50 and 50-foot buffers. And so this next slide kind of illustrates what that change looks like on the ground. So this is part of resource site CC7 here. And you can see on the left, those are the proposed draft E-zones. And then on the right, you can see this is the staff recommendation for smaller P-zone buffers, which would mean that there'd be less P-zone intersecting with existing homes on these sites. And on the vacant sites, that would mean that there'd be additional space where potentially you could develop on the sites. And if you want to dig into that and see what it looks like on a more detailed site-by-site analysis, you can do it actually, the map app that we have posted for this project. We have our discussion draft scenarios that we considered. There was a high, a medium, and a low scenario. And this would be consistent with the medium scenario E-zone. So if you click on that layer in the map app for this project, you can compare the proposed draft versus the medium scenario. This recommendation would only apply to zones that are in those single dwelling residential zones. So the R10, the R20, and the RF, it would not apply to industrial sites. Those sites would still have the 50-foot P-zone buffers on them.
Industrial and commercial, yeah. Non-residential would still maintain the baseline.
Any questions about that recommendation?
I just had a comment based on and what we discussed in the officers' meeting, and I just want to highlight that based on questions that particularly Commissioner Knowles had was, why residential and not industrial and commercial? And what I heard, and I just want to check that I'm remembering a few weeks later that because the area of a residential plat tends to be smaller, that there's less wiggle room to be able to accommodate other protections, whereas industrial and commercial, we have more wiggle room to be able to do so. Is that?
That's true. That's part of the consideration. But also, we have gone through on the industrial because industrial was we were so focused on industrial as well. We've gone through pretty comprehensively, essentially, to identify where environmental protection zone application per the baseline would cause issues. And so we have already done some site-specific modifications. This just happens to apply to those. Really, this is the large majority of residential within the corridor other than on Hayden Island, and so a single dwelling for sure. And so based on that review and looking into the testimony that we received from these different property owners, it seemed reasonable that because of that, both the small lots and the proximity of these resources to apply it more holistically. But we have where there are specific issues with a commercial or industrial site where, especially in terms of future development, we have already adjusted those proposals.
Great, thank you. Thank you.
All right, and so the next one is a mistake that we made when we were working with our GIS team. So, and this applies to Port of Portland. If you get into the memo, you can see the genesis of where this came from. We kind of trace back the error to where it happened, but there's basically the model that applies the draft E-zones is not always working in a way that's consistent with the recommendations that are written in the project document. And specifically, it's about buffers that are supposed to be applied around streams. It only applies to Port of Portland sites, but those stream buffers were in some cases not being applied in the way that they should have. And this error was masked because in a lot of cases, the streams overlap with wetlands, and so the wetlands were getting the buffers appropriately, but portions of the stream extended outside of the wetland, and that portion of the stream that was outside of the wetland was not getting the buffer appropriately. And so all we're saying that we want to do with this recommendation is to fix the error in the computer model and make those draft E-zones consistent with what's written in the documents. Yeah, this map illustrates the issue, and as Jeff was just asking, it's the gross impact of this would be 9 acres of additional E-zones on Port of Portland sites.
Well,
And-
going from C-zone to P-zone.
Right, additional
Yeah,
P-zone that
not-
was previously.
They already were in the conservation overlay zone, but it would push it to the protection overlay zone. Yeah.
And you can see on this slide here, so on the left, those are our proposed draft E-zones. And you can see we have the map top of bank of the slough or stream that's on that site there. And in theory, that protection zone was supposed to extend 50 feet from the bank of the slough. And clearly, the slough is extending into the C-zone on that site there. So there was a problem, and it took us a while to figure out what the problem was, but we've fixed it now.
And I think to emphasize what was on the previous slide, one of the things we have, the agreement with Metro is that we aren't rolling back. You have to maintain or increase your protections based on existing requirements. And so though that 50-foot P-zone around the streams was a part of the Middle Columbia Airport Futures Plan. And so we have also, part of the process that we did already is to make sure that all of the proposals were not going to reduce the protections per that agreement with Metro when we apply these new proposals for the CCIL. And so in this case, the Port of Portland sites were the only industrial and commercial development that was part of the Middle Columbia Airport Futures. Yes, got the yes. And so that does exist for the Port of Portland properties. And so we are just through this, we would have seen a reduction in the protection zone and the protections that are applied. So to support that consistency where we're making sure we aren't reducing and rolling back, as it says there, that's what this is really about.
All right, and then one other holistic geographic type amendment is there are about 15 single-dwelling residential lots that are on the levee itself. They have frontage on the Columbia River. Their driveways are on Marine Drive, and they have existing E-zones that cover just a little sliver at the edge of the Columbia River. But to be consistent with the FEMA BIOP, we're proposing to apply C-zone to the portions of the map floodplain that are, again, within 170 feet of the ordinary high water of the Columbia River. For whatever reason, the way that FEMA mapped the floodplains on these sites, the floodplain goes beyond the crest of the levee. It goes almost all the way to Marine Drive, which is nonsensical because if the water made it over the top of the levee and the Marine Drive, it'd be flooding the rest of the Columbia corridor. So that's an error in the FEMA maps, but the way our computer model was working, a portion of that floodplain that's over the crest of the levee was within 170 feet of the river, so our C-zone was erroneously going beyond the levee too. And that's not consistent with the biological opinion recommendations, that's not consistent with how the E-zones are supposed to be mapped as part of this project. And so we did a site visit where most of the property owners that live along that area came out and met with us, and they pointed out that, your E-zone's going there, but the crest of the levee's here, it really should stop there. And we looked at that and said, yeah, that's true. Your house is right on the crest of the levee. And so you can see in this next slide, that polygon there, that pale blue polygon, blue, I think, yeah?
It's kind of like a gray.
Gray, okay. The gray polygon on the slide there.
Mauve, I don't know.
Where it intersects with the draft C-zone, we're saying it should be deleted because the crest of the levee really is running through the middle of those houses there. So anything that's beyond that should not be C-zone. And so there's 15 tax lots that would impact, and that's a recommendation that we're making. Any questions about that? All right, and then site-specific testimony. So as Jeff said, we had 32 pieces of oral testimony, 84 pieces of written testimony, somewhere around 50 or 60 sites in there summarized through those 100 and something pieces of testimony. We have prepared individual responses to each of those pieces of site-specific testimony. Because there's so many, we're looking at about half of them in this meeting, and then we'll come back to you on April 28th to look at the other half. And so this is the first set that was summarized in 2 separate memos that we sent to you on Friday, I believe, and I apologize that they came in so late because that was a lot of material to digest in a short period of time. So we're going to talk about a handful of those sites individually, but we have the information for you. So if there are specific sites that you have questions about, we can pull out some of that information and dig in more detail. But we're just going to kind of do an overview of some of those sites for now, unless you have questions. So we'll start with Memo 2A, which was the baseline sites. And there were 17 sites that are in the baseline geography that submitted site-specific testimony. We reviewed all of those 17 sites. And of those, there are 7 that we believe should be amended. And so some of those amendments are on the basis of site visits that we've done where there's changes to, and so I'll go through one by one on these categories. So the first one was the inadvertent application of riparian buffer requirements. This is what I started talking to you about earlier in this presentation when I should have been talking about code. So this is those sites where inappropriately the riparian buffer area was being applied around a stream that was not.
We have separate slides, so let me just.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
So
then,
the first 2 we have specific that we'll address, so let's just go to the other 2.
So BL6, in many different industrial sites, not many, a few industrial sites where the draft P zone would potentially cause problems for the development of site access. We've done manual conversions from P to C to make sure that driveway access points are not in the P zone. So there's one of the industrial sites that we received testimony about met that category of manual conversions that we've done elsewhere in the project area. And so we're proposing to do a manual conversion on that site where the driveway is located. And then there are 4 sites where we did site visits, and we're proposing to add vegetation mapping, top of bank mapping, and/or special habitat area mapping on those sites. And those changes would result in reductions in the amount of E-zone that's applied to those sites, either a shrinkage of the conservation zone or reduction of protection zone. And then a couple of the sites, so this is the one where we were erroneously applying C-zone to the riparian buffer area. This is a tributary stream that eventually flows into the lower Columbia Slough, but the stream itself is small and does not provide habitat for salmon or steelhead, so it's not appropriate to apply that riparian buffer area on that particular site. So proposing to go from what's on the left, which is in the proposed draft, to what's on the right, where the E-zones would be applying a buffer to the slough or to the stream itself, and then C-zone would be applied to higher medium ranking riparian resources, but not to that portion of the floodplain that was originally on this site.
And that would apply to, because we applied to a number of properties along this way, that would apply to all of those along Time Oil Road. Yeah.
Yes.
From our last episode, I remember that to have C-zone and P-zone, if it's already developed, the requirement is not to remove that. It's just for future development. So I'm curious, what is the harm, or if this is already developed, but why not just keep the C-zone there? I don't know how else to ask that
It's
question.
just to be consistent with the directives that are in the document and to be with the principles that we're espousing, that the C-zone is only applied to low-ranking resources in that situation where it meets the riparian buffer area requirements, and this is a situation where it doesn't. But if we were to not make this change, I don't think the impacts on this particular site would be all that significant, because as you point out, it's a developed site, it's C-zone. All of that C-zone is outside of the specifications for setbacks that are in the zoning code, and there are allowances for additional development within existing disturbance areas and over pavement. So really, this isn't all that impactful for the site. And if somebody came to me, if it was appropriate to apply the C-zone on the basis of the riparian buffer area, and we were reviewing this, we'd probably say that this is not a very impactful project proposal for this particular site, and that all that would be required would be resource enhancements elsewhere on the site if they wanted to expand development.
But this is a situation where the protection zone will still be within the 50 feet. So again, we're starting at the baseline protections at darker green. And so this is one of those situations that really shows where we were applying that conservation zone outside of that base protection zone. And it just doesn't meet one of the criteria, and we don't want to apply something. We have identified criteria that we're trying to be consistent about, and this is one of those where the riparian buffer area was just inadvertently included in that, on that stream, and so we are just correcting that to make sure that it's applied consistently in the areas that it's supposed to be.
Okay.
But this is a recommendation for an amendment, and so if you felt like you really thought it was appropriate to keep the C-zone there, this is your purview to make these amendments, so this is just our recommendation.
But again, we want that to be based on criteria that we establish. Yeah.
And then this next site, this is a site that's in the Bridgeton neighborhood. It's a vacant site. The Bridgeton Slough occupies about 2/3 of the site area. So really the site is the slough, but then there's a little sliver of land outside of it. And this is a vacant site that's owned by some homeowners that testified that they were hoping to develop this site at some point in the future. They have some development proposals that we're not sure if they could meet standards or not. They haven't gone through the permitting process, but they are hoping to develop the site in the future. And with the amount of P-zone on the site there, they would, their current proposals couldn't meet standards and probably couldn't be approved through environmental review either because of the required 25-foot setback. And so what we're proposing here is to convert any portion of the protection zone that's more than 15 feet away from the bank of the slough into conservation zone. And so if you go back and look at their testimony and look at their site plans, they still couldn't meet standards in the E-zone code, but they could potentially get approved through environmental review. And the reason that it's important is because if you're doing impacts within 15 feet of a feature like that, you really should mitigate those impacts. You should be doing site enhancement requirements. And so we're allowing for a world in which they could potentially get that development approved through environmental review, but they would be required to do mitigations for those impacts.
And this is just, again, consistent with when there is significant expansion, proposed protection overlay zone, given the rigid nature of those proposals on a site, we generally accommodate an allowance for some future development so that there isn't any long-term issues with the site itself. And so this, I think, we're not necessarily, this is not based on their proposal necessarily, but it is based on to try to get to a point to where they have we are allowing for an adequate level of development on the site moving forward. Whereas with the protection zone, given the location of the slough, it would be generally difficult to develop it moving forward. Next.
And then there were 10 additional pieces of testimony that applied in this geography where we reviewed the testimony, reviewed the site conditions, and have determined that we don't believe it's appropriate to make any amendments based on our recommendations. So the first 4 are sites that we've identified where there are past violations of E-zone regulations, either illegal fill, covered up wetlands, illegal grading and removing of it. I shouldn't say illegal, I should say not consistent with code. Unpermitted is probably the more appropriate nomenclature, but they did not follow the permitting process and removed resources on these sites. And there's clear documentation and evidence of that either in aerial imagery or LiDAR terrain mapping that demonstrate that. And we said we should not be in any situation reducing the amount of E-zone that should be applied to those sites if the resources were removed through a violation.
So then, but it does provide for them once they do resolve that environmental violation, we have a process that they can adjust and update the E-zone application on the site to coincide with those resources. But again, we have a longstanding policy to not basically kind of reward an environmental violation. So we make sure that we still apply the environmental zone once whatever that violation is resolved, and we can do something about it and change it.
And then the other sites are ones where we reviewed the E-zone mapping on the sites. We looked at what the resource protection decisions were that were listed in the documents, and we feel like based on our analysis, the application is correct. Some of these are sites that we did site visits on, and we confirmed the natural resource mapping through those site visits, and others are ones that we have not done site visits, but based on our aerial imagery and our natural resource inventory, everything appears to be working correctly in those sites. And then we also have some additional sites in the East Columbia neighborhood. So as we talked about earlier, there's that general change to the policy to residential lots in there, so this would apply. And then above and beyond that, we've done a number of site visits in that neighborhood to some of the residential sites, and we're making some changes or proposing some changes to the E-zone mapping on several of those sites. And so those changes include changes in the mapping of vegetation. We're deleting some portions of vegetation mapping areas, which would then reduce the C-zone appropriately. And we're making some edits to the top of bank mapping and special habitat area mapping, which would also reduce respectively protection zone and conservation zone on those sites. And again, these are all detailed in those memos. But if you have questions about any of these sites, we can review those at this point if there's anything. Yeah, and there were a couple of sites that were in that geography where we're recommending no amendments. I believe that the two that are highlighted here are industrial sites that were also within that geography where, again, we're not changing the resource protection policy that applies to the industrial sites, but we are considering the other natural resource mapping considerations that go into those draft E-zones. And so
So I think, and we can open it up to more general, but so one of the questions, this is really like what the next steps are. We've covered all of those that were in the memos that we provided. I don't know if there are any other sites that you all had questions about. I think in terms of Commissioner's feedback, the question like, if you have additional questions about individual sites, we're happy to work with you between now and over the next few weeks or before May 12th when those amendments are kind of proposed and evaluated. But if there's something particular that struck you from the memo, we're happy to talk about individual sites. But I think there's adequate time to continue the conversations and respond to any questions you have.
Thank you. That's great. Are there any other sites that you haven't made a visit to? I see I think you went to half of them. Is that right, that you took a site visit, or you visited all the sites that people requested a site visit?
where we've had a specific request for a site visit, we've already done all the site
Oh, you have?
visits.
Okay.
Yeah, and most of those are summarized in the memos that we provided.
Yep.
There'll be some additional ones that you'll be reviewing before the next meeting.
Okay.
But if someone
Sure,
submitted.
Ames,
Oh,
pardon
sorry.
me, Patricia Diefender for the record. I think also what we said about half was that the memos that were provided on Friday and that we've covered here today, about half of the sites. We're going to, at the next meeting, we're going to do a similar
Okay.
run-through of an additional,
Tranche.
tranche of
Yeah,
sites.
trying to again make it
Yeah.
manageable.
Yeah.
But also, so when there was testimony submitted, we did an evaluation of the site. It doesn't, if we have to have property owner, permission to go
Yeah.
and do a site visit. So we don't do them unless they're asked. But for every one of those, we have looked deeper into the site at where we have through GIS and other, aerial photos and everything that Daniel was talking about. So we've looked at every one of them. We haven't done a site visit to every
Got
one
it.
of them.
Okay.
But we have done, all the requested site visits have been completed and are considered as a part of the proposal, the recommendations that we have for all of you in the documents we provided.
Gotcha. Great. Thank you.
A follow-up to that, are all of the landowners notified of the recommendations like individually, or is it up to them to track what is the decision and the going forward based on their sites?
Well, I mean, I'll let Daniel speak to this, but when we are there, if we identify, say, for example, an area of vegetation that we think should be changed and it's not meeting our criteria, we communicate that to the owner. But in
Okay.
terms of the final outcome and all of this that's in the memos and that sort of thing, we don't give them that level of detail
Got it.
in this case, but when we're on site and we see something that's in error that needs to be addressed and we provide them with what the implications of that would be, we communicate that to them.
Okay,
on the site.
so otherwise it's up to the landowner to track what those recommendations are via this process?
That's correct.
Is there an appeal pathway to landowners if they disagree with the outcome?
Well, I would say that the city council is another opportunity for another hearing, but then
So
again,
not at a site-by-site, yeah.
well, I would say that process that we're talking about with those environmental violations applies to everyone. So if they can provide documentations, and we do this upon request, and it's free, it is a land use review, but it is free, and it's basically if they can, it's a little bit clearer if you think about, there's a stream that's running through the site, right? And we have it mapped at one location, and they do a site survey, and they say, oh, no, the stream actually goes this other direction. If they can provide that site, through this process, they provide that site survey to us, we will then, again, make that modification, and then that will translate to any changes to the environmental zones that are applied to that site. So even after everything is said and done with this project, there is always that process to be able to do, but it's very focused on the resources. So it has to be, we see it on the land, and there is a difference between what we have in our natural resource inventory and what they provide to us. And we do site visits separately to support those as well if that's appropriate and if someone asks us to do so. But so we kind of go through this process on a site-by-site level in those requests.
Okay, thank you.
Would it be interesting if the city did free land use consultations for housing development? I mean, free means the city's paying for it, right? So I don't know, that thought came to my mind. It seems a little bit like it's a budgetary decision that would be available for natural resource preservation, which sounds good, but there's other goals for the city as well. So I'm not gonna go with that anyhow, but I thought of it.
I will say that this is a relatively targeted effort. I mean, it depends on what you mean by land use process, but yeah, and really BPS does that evaluation, and then it goes through PP&D, but largely it's on our resource. Yeah, it's our resources that we use.
Yeah, and they do provide early assistance meetings, and there are not free early assistance meetings, but there are free 15-minute appointment meetings, and so there's some consultative services that are provided by the city, but not to the level that you're suggesting. And then, so we were getting into next steps. I don't know if this slide will come back up, but yeah, there we go. So April 28th, in 2 weeks, we'll be back to talk about the remainder of these sites that we've reviewed and provided feedback on. So there'll be some additional memoranda that will be coming to you later this week. And if you think of any amendments or things like that, we can discuss those at that meeting. And then we're hoping that at May 12th, we'll be able to do a full review of any amendments that are requested or that we're recommending, and potentially a final vote, unless we feel like we need additional time to consider the project proposals beyond that.
I think we're actually pretty significantly early.
It's kind of shocking.
It's kind of shocking, I agree.
Any other thoughts, questions, comments? I only read the 108-page memo cursorily, so I will promise to give it another fuller read before our next chat. Okay, well, thank you, Jeff, thank you, Daniel. And with that, we are going to, this agenda item will be continued on to April 28th, and thank you very much for your time. And I don't believe we are at time certain, so we can continue apace, shall we? Okay.
Yeah, these are work sessions, so we're okay to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. So with that, we're going to shift our focus to the economic opportunity analysis and bring up Tom Armstrong and Corinne Saucedo. And I would like this registered for all of the times that we have made you to wait. Extra time, we have allowed you to reclaim this time. Don't say that we don't give you things.
I'm joining the meeting.
Okay, well, while we're waiting for things to come up, I'll say the voter registration deadline is April 28th. So if you need to update your address or your party affiliation, you have 2 more weeks to do so. That's our public service announcement for the day.
Can you share me? No, did not. I can't share. There we go. Right. All right, good afternoon, commissioners. For the record, I'm Tom Armstrong. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a supervising planner with BPS.
And Corinne Sacedo, Senior Economic Planner with BPS as well, he, him. Thanks.
So this is a work session, our second work session on the Economic Opportunities Analysis, the EOA. Again, the EOA is a long-range employment forecast and land needs analysis. It's a supporting document to the comprehensive plan. And it provides a basis for making future decisions around policy and zoning where the land supply or development capacity comes into play. And what we'll get into in the second half of the discussion today is that while it's not necessarily an economic development action plan, it is an opportunity to identify future strategies and actions that can address barriers to economic development. And we'll get into that later today. What we have for you this afternoon to work through and discuss are some updates on the land supply calculations, especially for the industrial land areas. We included in your agenda packet a steep slope analysis and refinement, and so we'll go through some of those details and answer any questions you may have about that. We've also, you've just heard a lot about the CCIL changes, and we've incorporated those into what we're calling the revised proposed draft. And so you can see how those changes play out in combination with the steep slope changes and what impact that has specifically on the industrial land supply. Then, in response to testimony, we have proposed some additions to the EOA document itself that talks about the Portland Harbor and the marine industrial land analysis. Again, that was a separate memo in your agenda packet, and we can discuss some of those elements. The third item is a new piece that where we have gone through the comprehensive plan document itself and identified references to the old EOA and where we have suggested text adjustments. Technically, that's an amendment, but text adjustments to those references to reflect the new EOA. These are not policy amendments per se, but more of the narrative background that is in the comprehensive plan. And then finally, back to this idea of a citywide strategy discussion and looking at all of the potential future actions we could take to support economic development. This came up in our discussion last time, and it is an opportunity for you all, especially in your transmittal memo to council, letter to council, to suggest given everything you've heard in testimony and what you've seen and read in the analysis, what strikes you as should be priorities for the city to seek out and pursue? And so we can review those strategies with you all and start that discussion to inform everything. And then at the end, I'll go over, but this is to say, especially the first three agenda items, similar to what Jeff and Daniel were talking about, these would all be reflected in a proposed amendment to the proposed draft of the EOA that we would bring right now, we would bring to you at the May 12th meeting. That is also to say that if there are additional questions that come up in today's discussion that you would like more information on, we can figure that out, and we can either bring that back to you all on April 28th, or if it's more minor, we can incorporate it as part of the May 12th discussion with you all. Any process questions before we get into some of the content? Okay. So land supply update. So the first thing that we wanted to cover has to do, and we talked a little bit about this at the last work session, and that is around the steep slope constraint factor that is applied to the buildable land inventory in the industrial areas specifically. And we had, as we explained last time, we had testimony that noted that in the most recent Metro Urban Growth Report that they used to look at the regional industrial land supply, that Metro had used 10% slope as the threshold, whereas in the proposed draft, we are using a 25% slope. And so we've gone back through and we've done, we think it is a reasonable change to shift to that 10% slope factor as part of our constraint analysis. And the memo explains, we went through and we looked at that. And there really are sort of three variables here that we're looking at. It's not just what is the degree of the slope, but it is how much of the site area is covered by that slope. And then once you determine a site has a significant amount of slope, how much should we discount the capacity of that, that slope constraint? And we've made adjustments to all three of those variables. And I'll go through how we did that and why we did that. But basically, we are looking at shallower slopes, going from 25% slope to 10% slope. But when you go to that shallower slope, we're looking for more coverage of that shallow slope. Because as you will see, we have actually seen instances where people have gone in and developed slopes sort of between that, call it 10 and 25%. They've graded the site, they've filled, they put in retaining walls. So some of that is, what we're basically saying is with that wider coverage area going from 25% coverage of the site to 33%, you need more of that shallow slope to have it become a significant impact on development. And again, we're reducing that constraint discount factor from 65% to 50%, again, to reflect that those shallower slopes are a little bit more developable, so not as steep as discount. The other with those changes on wider slope, or wider coverage and not as deep a discount, the other factor that we are trying to account for, and we talked a little bit about this last time, is the noisiness of the data. And we've worked with our GIS team and the team at Metro to get as good a data as you can. But what you see is an illustration in this diagram is the areas in yellow are the areas that have 25% slope or greater. And the areas in green are the areas with 10% slope or between 10 and 25% slope. And you can see examples here of just sort of noisiness in the data. If you look up towards the top of the screen, you see sort of those three lines that those are actually up in here. You know, those are landscaping berms that get picked up in the data. And so by widening the coverage and lessening the discount, we're trying to account for a little bit of that noisiness sort of within the margin of the error of the data that we're working with. This is two examples of development and how they're responding to slope. The one on the left in the blue is the former Broadmoor Golf Course site that fronts onto Columbia Boulevard. It has been developed by the development company Prologis. And on the back side of this, or on the top of the screen, they put in a 10, 15-foot retaining wall to level out the site.
I've been to the base of that wall. That's like 40 foot tall.
Is it?
Absolutely mind blowing. And it's about the length of 2 football fields. I can't believe that, but it's retaining the site. So they have a flat site on top.
Yeah. And so this is just an example of I think it's indicative of as Portland's industrial land supply becomes tighter and tighter, companies are willing to invest in the expense of a retaining wall and grading to be able to create these developable sites. And again, this is a site that prior to that grading had 40% of the site was 10% or more slope. The site on the right-hand side is a smaller site, but this is one where actually the developers chose to stay off the steeper slope and not invest in the retaining wall. Again, it had about a 34% coverage of the slope. So yeah, I think it's to say that we have found and in the memo document other examples of where that sort of 10 to 25% slope has been developed. And we think that's a trend that will increase as our land supply gets tighter. And again, more for the reason of requiring more of the site to be covered by that 10% slope and not as deep a discount. With this proposal, and again, this is the base inventory before we make any changes due to the CCIL or investment or the Northreach project or community livability buffers. Just changing the slope constraint to a factor in the 10% slope will result in a 37-acre reduction in our base industrial capacity. We have also incorporated into that analysis the site reviews that are ongoing through the CCIL adjustment. Again, this is where sort of the combination of the recommendations you make in CCIL get picked up into the EOA and factored into the EOA. And this is part of the series of sort of actions that we're trying to account for in the EOA. This is a chart we've shown before, and that we're picking up the CCIL environmental overlay zone changes. We're anticipating the future Northreach project, the future community livability buffer changes, and also investment strategies in terms of brownfields or freight investments. And then all told, where we were, or in the proposed draft currently, is a 258-acre surplus. And then if we factor in the steep slopes changes and the CCIL changes, that's about a 100-acre reduction in the capacity, and it takes us to a 159-acre supply. So a little tighter, still a surplus. Another way to look at this, again, this is a chart that we've shown before, working sort of left to right. Think of each of these columns as a series of decisions. So we start with the base on the left. We have a 56-acre reduction from the CCIL E-zone changes. If we just stopped there and did nothing else, we still have a slight surplus. Then what we factored in the next column is what we called the low investment scenario, so brownfield incentives and freight investments. That results in an 88-acre increase in capacity. And then if you factor in the other actions, mainly the North Reach project and the community livability buffers, that takes away a little bit more of that capacity, 92-acre reduction from those projects. And that's how we wind up in what we would call the revised proposed draft, and that 159-acre surplus. And I will say what we intend to do is produce what we call a revised proposed draft, where we update all the tables in the EOA document with red lines, and you can see how these numbers change and how it flows. We included a couple of those in the memo, just to show you how those work out in comparison. A little bit more thinking about constraints and gross acres, and one of the challenges we have is that there is a lot of overlap. You have sites that have E-zones and are brownfields. You have sites that are brownfields and have infrastructure constraints. And so the model tries to pick up that interaction and that interplay between all of those different overlays. But each one of them has a little bit. But this is to show, the constraints with the widest area and widest area of impact are the substandard transportation facilities, the unimproved streets, the constrained intersections, brownfields, and then the hazard areas, the floodplain and the steep slopes.
Forgive me, when you say constrained intersections, what do you mean when you're saying that?
Those are when we do the traffic modeling, that they're at capacity in terms of at peak hour, there's congestion in there, that if a developer comes in as part of that added impact to that intersection, there would be some sort of a
Like
turn
access
lane
management.
or something like that. Some improvement might be required off the site to address that issue.
So it's a consideration, not a constraint.
It's a constraint on development because it's an added cost
Okay.
of development. It's that friction that we're trying to pick up. Like a developer will think, do I have to spend a couple $100,000 on a new signal? Do I really want to do this project here to account for that? This is a sort of
Hold on, I'm sorry.
yeah. Oh,
Vice Chair.
I know we haven't done this yet, but in the EOA strategies, it includes like allowing light industrial in CX zones or light manufacturing in neighborhood commercial zones. If that comes to pass, I mean, because really these areas are a proxy for jobs, I think, right? So if you get to a point where we can reasonably expect to get some light manufacturing jobs in those other zones, does that affect the chart you're doing right now?
That would affect the demand side, the where we think that employment would occur. And I think what we would want, that would be for the next EOA.
Okay.
Like, we would want to see some development trends that show that we're starting to see those jobs in those other areas, and that, we see now, I forget what the split is now, but not all industrial jobs are located in the industrial geographies. And so as part of the next DOA, 5 years from now, 7 years from now, if we see that development trend, we would adjust where those jobs are landing in terms of the geography. Just again, looking specifically at the BLI, where these different constraints come into play, and I will say we did an analysis. I think this was in response to a question last time, or maybe to some public testimony. We focused in on the environmental overlays, and again, thinking about where you have parcels that have an environmental overlay in a brownfield or some other constraint. And when we really looked at where is it that we only have environmental overlay zones, and we found that there's only 37 acres of capacity that only have E-zones on it and not some other constraint. And those tend to be more of the isolated wetlands or an isolated tree grove. There's a lot of overlay between intersection between the environmental overlay and the steep slopes and the floodplains, right? All the floodplains get an environmental overlay. A lot of the steep slopes are banks to the slough, banks to the river, and about 40% of the environmental overlays intersect with either the floodplains or the steep slopes. So you get a lot of that interplay. But when we zoomed in to like just where is the environmental overlay being applied to the industrial land base, it's about 37 acres of that future capacity. So a pretty small regulatory barrier as a standalone regulatory barrier. Just to wrap up on sort of the industrial land supply questions, I think one of the other questions that we had is that how does our tight land supply play into the larger regional picture? And we just wanted to note that Metro is thinking about this too. And they've just created what they call a Jobs Ready Lands program. This pulls together some of the things that they're already doing, but in a more formal programmatic sense, and that they are starting to put more of their resources towards this. So the regional comprehensive economic development strategy, otherwise known as the CEDS, is a coordinated strategy. It helps identify target industries and is mainly used to qualify for federal grants, economic development grants. But it helps get the region on the same page and working with Business Oregon as well. Metro is devoting more of their work and more of their planning grant funding towards economic development and industrial land readiness program. And that's where I think we've talked a little bit about the Portland Industrial Lands Project, PILLAR as we call it. We got a big grant from Metro to do this work. We looked at, this was mainly focused on the short-term industrial land supply and what is development ready or close to being development ready. And we use that money to hire a consultant and to do outreach to the development community to really identify what might be some actions that can help unlock that development capacity in the short term and what the barriers to development were. And a lot of this in terms of future actions have been incorporated into the strategies that we've identified in the EOA in terms of regulatory improvements in permitting, the brownfield incentives, and transportation infrastructure really rising to the top. So with that is the high-level summary of what we're trying to do. I'll open it to any of your questions. Anything? All right. We'll keep, so what you will see is we will produce a revised proposed draft with red line changes that incorporate this shift to the 10% slope, that the tables incorporate both that move and the CCIL changes. And so you'll be able to see how that ripples all the way through the document. And so with that, I'm going to turn things over to Corinne to talk about the Portland Harbor.
Corinne Cicedo with DPS, just for the record. We'll give Tom a break for 2 slides here. Just want to update you all on that discussion of the Portland Harbor and that MELA study. So we are adding more narrative around the unique asset that is the Portland Harbor and kind of what jobs it creates, it supports, and how it really can't be relocated, it can't be reconstituted somewhere else. So while we're not changing the methodology, we still think that we want to be consistent across these different areas. We are adding more to the EOA related to emphasize what a unique and important asset it is. So as just a reminder, in that MELA study from 5 years ago, it was giving us a range of potential land demand, going from potentially a negative, a decrease in demand in the future to anywhere up to 600 new acres needed. If everything happened as in the Superfund site getting sort of redeveloped a little faster, that there was a lot of investment in this area, a lot of public investment. We thought some of that was a little optimistic in terms of how quickly and how much could be developed. We chose a more narrow projection in terms of what we incorporate in the EOA, and that was based on what we've seen in recent years. So just highlighting again, we're trying to be consistent with our other geographic areas in terms of how we're projecting job creation and land need based on that job. That's the update on the harbor. We're just bolstering a little bit in the document.
Any questions about that approach? All right, we'll keep moving. The next piece of this are the comp plan changes itself. And again, we included a memo that really identified the areas of the comp plan where we would change this narrative text. In general, it's just updating the numbers. If you think about it and you see there, it references job growth out to 2035. In general, we're pushing that out with our new numbers out to 2045, and just, adjusting other references, especially where there are numbers that change with respect to reflect the current forecasts and information in the EOA. So questions about some of those changes?
Chair Roth, thank you. I just wanted to, just as a reminder, note that among the materials you received for the EOA, the memos that we sent, I forget when it was, earlier last week, the specific comp plan references that would be changed were itemized in one of those memos, and also just back to the marine industrial land use or land analysis for a moment, there was a memo specifically on that, and the proposed language, the additional language and narrative that would be added to the revised EOA document. So again, among the red lines, Tom mentioned that you'll see a revised document with red lines with all of these changes. These comp plan changes and this additional narrative related to the marine industrial areas will be included. And those were part of those memos.
Okay,
We could-
I'll probably come back to this, but please.
Well, I think that the next step would be to move into the implementation strategy discussion, so I
Well,
think
then
it's appropriate.
Behold my can of worms that I'm about to open. I guess through the economic opportunity analysis conversation that we've had, and then the larger question around, the regions and the state's economic recovery, and obviously I have some recency bias of the recent legislative session, but I feel like I keep coming into a tension with what we mean by, like, what is a good job? What are our job forecasts? What is the next 10 to 50 years of Portland region's industry, and what we mean by it? We've had several decades where the semiconductor industry, through the development of Intel and the industries that surround them, have really created this region, but particularly Washington County, as in many ways the economic driver of our state. And we also have seen a lot of significant and serial layoffs in the semiconductor industry over the last several years. And through COVID, we saw, and we continue to see, a shifting use of our industrial lands, in particular for less manufacturing, more warehousing and distribution. And so I guess I still have, I continue to have these deeper questions when we are talking about what does economic opportunity mean? What is our vision for the next 10 to 50 years? To what extent are we trying to recapture what we feel that we had in 2018 that we have lost to some extent, particularly through COVID? And to what extent are we assuming the last 5 years are a trend that will continue, or is this a blip where we are looking to interrupt? And I feel like to some extent we are having, through some legislative pushes, what is called a jobs bill, that it's like we just need jobs. And this is how we think we can get it in the near term, versus what is our vision. And I'm curious, I also am curious about like where we are, where Metro is in convening the table around their Jobs Ready program. But where are we having these conversations, and how should we be looking at the EOA through the lens of, I think, a substantive, in-depth look at what our future economic growth should look like, I feel like we're looking at trends and we're looking at numbers, and I still don't know how we are looking for those to translate into a thriving future. I know that is beyond the task of any one individual, but I guess I just want to name that tension in myself that I have not reconciled in the few years that we have been talking about this. And we are close to wanting to have a recommendation, and I don't know what we're talking about. Okay, thank you. Other thoughts?
When you're ready, I'd like to just, unless anyone wants to chime in first. Okay. I want to just start off by saying a few things, and then I want to invite Tom and Corinne to add to this and to correct me if I say anything wrong. But Steph, I think you're asking a really great, sorry, Chair Ralph, I think you're asking a really great question. And I've also been reflecting on this a little bit more as I've heard questions from you all and just other conversations that I've been having. And I think I just kind of want to recognize a few things. I think we are in this challenging moment where the trends of the recent past are, what they are. And part of the job of the EOA is part of it is we take the projections, as you know, the forecasts of the state and translate that into our aspirations for how much jobs we want to capture in terms of the regional jobs, right? But and there's been a slowing of growth across the board, and so the numbers are lower generally. And we've actually, this EOA, the proposed, represents our attempt to not underestimate the jobs too much, even to the extent that the forecast would suggest that we should. And we've been pretty resistant to that because we want to make sure that we're, to your point, trying to aspire to a future in which we have, more jobs and a wider range of jobs, and we regain some of maybe what we have lost during the pandemic. So, but at the same time, this is, when you look at the trends that have to inform, that by state law have to inform the EOA, we also are, to some degree bound by some of the realities of that analysis. But I think the question, and, in a way, and Tom, this is where I look to you to help me, but as we've said many times, the EOA is not necessarily the economic development strategy for the city. It is more an accounting to demonstrate our understanding of the demand for land to support a range of jobs, and then what the supply of that land is. But I do think that there are going to be some conversations coming up that are going to maybe provide the forum that you're thinking about, that is going to look more long-term at what the picture is beyond the 5 to 7 years that this EOA is supposed to carry us through, so to speak. I think one is, we've always pointed to the Advanced Portland Plan, as the plan that is the city's economic development strategy. I know there's efforts to, and interest to update that plan in the nearer term. I also know that Metro is undertaking, we talked about Metro and their Jobs Ready program, but more even, I think, big picture thinking, they're working on a 50-year strategy, the future vision process that they're undertaking right now. And that's literally, I think that was done in 1995 and informed the 2040 Metro plans that we all operate under at this moment. And this is the next generation of that's going to look out to 2077. I was like, when I heard that number, it almost kind of like, really blew my head off, because I'm like, so 2077 is a long way. But that is the visioning process that they're doing now that will inform the next growth strategy and functional plan. And I was having conversations with staff there, and one of the things that came up was their recognition that jobs and the types of employment that we will be competitive for in the region, and just how we strategically use our land to direct that to the degree that we can do that, is probably a conversation that will happen in that broader regional process. And then, these things are iterative, and once those regional conversations happen, then we're able to update local plans in accordance with that. And so they inform each other. So I just wanted to share that as some thoughts on, in the relative near term, there's going to be these very much sort of farther out and big picture conversations at a regional level that will, I think, be helpful to thinking about a future EOA and where a future EOA could also venture. I just wanted to share that. And I don't know, Tom, if you have anything else.
I mean, I think what you said was right in the sense that the EOA is a unique sort of vessel that we have to sort of think through from a land use perspective. And I know as we get into some of these strategies, we are trying to somewhat stay in our lane when it comes to what can we do from a regulatory standpoint, a land use standpoint. And I think through this effort and through studies like the Pillar study that was brought up, we identified a lot of barriers to land development. I think that's where our focus has been, is how do we reduce those barriers? So hopefully that when there is private interest or money towards investing in a project, we're not stopping that kind of growth. So we've been a little more focused on reducing the constraints on economic growth, even though to your point, we are equally excited about the concept of getting more creative about subsidies and business attraction and business development. But to Patricia's point, at least in this exercise, we've tried to keep it within that sort of land use and constraint-based analysis.
We got some pretty good testimony, I thought, about trying to lay a marker down that future EOA would be regional instead of Portland having to do its own. I know the city council can't control that, but is there some way we could provide a nudge, a suggestion, give city council an idea of how they can make that possible? Because it doesn't make sense to me, and I think it's true that industrial lands will become thinner. If you always have to do it at the city level, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I think that would be an appropriate comment to make in your transmittal letter, noting the limitations of the current sort of Goal 9 and the statutes and administrative rules that we're subject to, and the reality of our regional economy and needing that bigger picture look. I just picking up on what you said about asking the question about what constitutes a good job. And I think what we've tried to identify and talk about in the EOA, sort of coming at the definition of a good job, sort of coming in two directions. One is, what's the level of education required for those jobs? And the second is, and what is the wage? What can you earn? And that's where we come up with those middle wage jobs with low barrier to entry that really don't require a 4-year college degree is the line that we sort of drew at. And there's analysis in the EOA that talks about, and this is more on a regional level, not just a Portland level, but when you look at where those types of jobs are, about 60% of them are industrial jobs. And then the other 40% are a mix of office administration jobs and healthcare professions. I think most right now, those office administration jobs are both leaving the city or have left the city with our high levels of office vacancy in the central city, and are probably most at threat due to AI and changes in automation. And so, I think that's why, again, there's an intersection there between what constitutes a good job if the bulk of those are industry, and yet at the same time, we have a tight industrial supply, at least in Portland, and if not the region. That's where the focus really becomes on those jobs. And what we've tried to emphasize, and this is again where the other economic development strategies come in terms of identifying target industries, being more of the manufacturing type jobs. That helps to go, as Corinne was touching on, where does the city deploy the incentives in terms of business recruitment and business support? And those are focused on the manufacturing jobs. That's sort of what Prosper Portland does. And then just to bring it full circle, sort of our lane is to make sure that there's adequate land capacity for those businesses to land and grow and expand. And that's what we're exploring through the EOA.
First, did anyone else? Because this is what wakes me up at 2 a.m. I know we talk about manufacturing jobs, and I will say, like, growing up in Park Rose, a good chunk of my high school friends are tradespeople. So, and we still live in the area. So I'm probably going to get calls tonight for this. Manufacturing jobs is cyclical. It is based on, and we've talked about that in a previous. I also I just want to push back just a tiny bit, like on our assumptions, like we are where we are. And I think there's acknowledging where we are as an economy now. And then there's also this leap of where we think we might be or how we got to where we are and what systems could change. A lot of our middle to thriving wage jobs are based on statute, incentives, recruitment, and just valuation of different work. And a lot of that is also gendered. And I think that that's something that we haven't brought up previously, that we tend to undervalue industries once women come into them. And so I just want to acknowledge that when we are talking about economic opportunities, I have been thinking a lot about that the manufacturing job still tends to index, and I really want to appreciate some of our friends at IBEW and Ironworkers and others that have very specific programs to bring women into the workforce, into the trades, but that still is very, very gendered. And when I also think of all of these things are connected. that Oregon also has continues to have the dubious distinction of having the highest proportion of homeless families with small children, and that tends to be women-centered in that issue. So I guess I also think when we are talking about incentivizing different industries, that also is putting a finger on the scale of what is a thriving wage job. So there's this feedback loop.
Yeah, and
If we
again,
want
just
different, I guess I think
bring
also
it
like we
around.
have a care economy as well,
Yes.
and that
and there's huge growth, right? Aging population, there's going to be lots of need. Again, sort of staying in our lane, what we see is there is room to grow in that care economy or reinventing use of the office space. That's what we at BPS and you all, that's sort of what we can do about it and weigh in. And we can show that, hey, there could be these opportunities in these other fields through the EOA and the employment forecast, but that it is these other elements the SEDS and the advanced Portland plans and the identification of the target industries and where are we allocating our funds and addressing issues of equity like you're talking about, and how do we, overcome some of those gender barriers that really fall outside of the EOA
Oh, yeah,
focus.
totally.
Yeah.
Solve for gender inequities, Tom.
Chair Roth, I think for me, I keep looking on the other side of
Yeah.
the more menu side of our handout. And the key element being the connecting growing businesses to workforce development. And so that's where the Prosper and the WorkSource and those other agencies that have funding for workforce development come in. And I think, again, to the extent we can advocate for a regional approach, those funds are at risk across that continuum. So to me, the lane of the planning element is looking at barriers for a diversity of workforce opportunities on a land use side. And then we have to connect those to the actual funds for workforce development to reach low-income folks and to reach women and others who need those opportunities. So I think it's important we're raising that, and thank you for raising it. And I'm really curious to learn more about that specific element, but I think it's a really important consideration for us to push on. Thank you.
Yeah,
There we go.
there we go. Yeah, this is all great transition into, just talking more about these strategies. As I think Tom mentioned earlier, the EOA is sort of a land supply demand calculation. We do get into barriers. That's typically where EOAs kind of draw the line, but in this case, we are exploring strategies and then putting them out there to hopefully be considered by yourselves, City Council, Prosper, et cetera. Within your transmittal letter, we, love it if you guys were to highlight any of these strategies that you think deserve any priority. So this is mostly a discussion and sort of here to facilitate any conversations around these ideas that we've identified, whether it is through other studies, through discussions internally, and hopefully to hear from you all. So I think in our process here, again, we split these up based on the 5 areas we have been discussing in the EOA. And I know might as well start with the.
Sorry, pardon me. I just want to, pardon me for the record, Patricia Diefendorfer. This discussion we're facilitating at the request of the commission, where you all asked last meeting to delve into the strategies a little bit more and for you all to potentially identify priorities for the transmittal letter. So I just wanted to make sure this is not something, you have to do, but it's certainly something that you expressed interest in, and we're trying to facilitate that conversation. And we're happy to have that information incorporated. Just wanted to clarify that.
So there's, I think, 26 different strategies. I don't think we have time to get into each one in detail, but we can bounce around some of these areas. And if there are things that jump out to you that we should be aware of or that you all would like to consider, we're happy to facilitate that. So starting in that industrial area, what we looked at is, and again, this ties back to the slide that you saw earlier about where are we seeing the most constraints? What is, based on our modeling, the biggest constraint to land supply when it comes to these areas? And a lot of that is infrastructure, it's transportation. So we're suggesting here that there should be more reforms sometimes on the regulatory side. So we think there could be faster permitting process. So you have concurrent permitting as opposed to sequential. And that's a way that we think could at least accelerate the process, reduce the amount of time it takes to actually get a project moving. If we can have developer-led infrastructure reimbursement, so PBOT can work with the developer, make that process a little smoother? Can we tweak the zoning code if there are contemporary users that need any kind of adjustments that we're seeing consistently, whether that's more office space or prototyping space? Do we need to rethink any of those elements in code? The infrastructure, the remediation, transportation infrastructure. Curious if any of these things jump out to you as higher priority or lesser priority. Yeah.
Not much on this one because it's not my area I know very well. But I will say that the first item, I'm running into right now precisely this issue for the residential development, where it'd be sure nice to be able to do concurrent demo and new development review impacts financing. So I appreciate that this probably comes up in industrial settings as well. One thing that's not on this list that I thought would be in this category is some testimony we got about, this is all like how to boost growth, but there's nothing like that. I'm thinking of the CEI hub. Like, how do we prevent our economy from going down the tank when the earthquake happens? I would think that'd be part of an economic development strategy by diversifying geographically where we have things located. So that's sort of a long-term thing that I think has a place here. So we're not. This is all offense, and a little defense might be wise. That's my comments on that one.
Luke is good.
I'm just a little curious. What I'd like to learn more about in the coming meetings is kind of about the Superfund and Brownfield readiness funding, since so much of that is reliant on the state of Oregon and the federal government, and how kind of chaotic of a place that is right now. I'm just kind of curious if the city has like any further in-depth strategies of like what they can specifically do to help tackle this, because I know that it's going to depend a lot on other actors.
Yeah, that was one that we, to your point, it's tough to have a lot of local leverage over that, besides maybe working with the state resources that exist, promoting it, enabling it. But the federal funds, can very much depend on that budget cycle, that administration. So I think it's leveraging the state tools would be my primary answer there.
I'm curious about what would be parameters of development-led infrastructure reimbursement. It sounds like really, really good. I'm curious what, like, an example of that, or?
I think this was more where we've heard a developer had an infrastructure that needed to be upgraded, was willing to do it themselves, to contract it out. But because the current system had to wait for PBOT to do it in their timeline as opposed to the developer's timeline. So could you develop the trust or the system so that it wasn't as dependent on the public sector versus the private?
Would have been infrastructure that the city would have otherwise have done in their own timelines.
Yeah, this was based on a model out of Seattle where, again, sometimes there's a situation where a developer is responsible for a piece of the impact, right? And okay, you're going to have to cover 20% of the cost, and the surrounding development or the city picks up the other 80%. And then you have to wait around until they collect that other 80% to put in that actual infrastructure. And if the developer is having to wait around to get everybody on the same page, then that's a delay. In Seattle, they have a program where if the developer is willing to do it, they can build all that infrastructure up front, and the surrounding property owners are sort of on the hook as they come in to develop. They got to pay that developer back. The initial developer has fronted the cost, right, as opposed to sitting around and waiting for all the pieces to fall in place. But that would take sort of a new city program, figuring out those agreements, figuring out how you obligate the surrounding property owners. It's a whole system that Seattle has set up that could be replicated here.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Is that not an LID? Is that something different?
It's a little different than that. The LID is usually still organized by the city, and then the costs go on the property tax bills as a surcharge on the property tax bill, and this is a little bit different than that.
We can keep moving unless other comments on infrastructure, but I know we spent a lot of time talking about the industrial areas. The central city is one, obviously, where there's a lot of interest these days, and I think some of these strategies have been developed at the same time as the Central City Code Amendment, so there are fortunately, some overlap here. Can we make the CX zone a little more flexible in terms of uses? Whether that is light production, obviously looking at housing. Are there ways to accelerate the adaptive reuse of our office buildings, primarily downtown? Can we do more pop-up activation? How do we support just more ground-up housing development? Can we figure out a way of leveraging our waterfronts more for development? So are there any strategies when it comes to the central city that you all have thought are areas that the city should focus on or to really lean into?
I'd probably put the waterfront at the top of the list, because I think that when they removed the highway along the waterfront, there was never a plan for it to be a grassy strip for 50 years. And I just heard at lunch today that actually there was a plan drawn up for the waterfront way back then, but it never went anywhere. I think that that's just key to revitalizing the central city, to make it a draw, because employment is not the draw right now. I also, I like the including light industrial in the CX zone, and that made me think about a little further ahead, light industrial and neighborhood commercial zones. Maybe there's like a code project, maybe this is the way you're thinking of it already, that just sort of adds that use to some additional zoning areas. Another two-leg question, though. One is the Adaptive Reuse Acceleration Program, converting existing buildings into viable employment space. Is this going office to employment? I'm not quite sure. Like, we have lots of office space. So I don't understand it seems like that's where we already have a surplus. And I'll just throw one more question, because the other one's the next one on allow additional housing in commercial areas. That way I also didn't quite understand, because it feels like we have pretty big entitlements for housing downtown. We don't have enough of it, but the entitlements already seem, maybe you're thinking about allowing even taller residential buildings, but those are the two that I sort of wondered whether I know they're hot things to talk about, whether they're actually going to get us further.
Commissioner Spivak, just to respond to the adaptive reuse question, I think that that's tied into a little bit the just expanding flexibility of employment uses. To the extent that there are office buildings that could be not just converted into housing, which is obviously something that the city is interested in trying to facilitate where the opportunities exist, but also even light manufacturing or other kinds of employment uses. So I think that is just referring to the idea that taking time to better understand what might be barriers to existing buildings being converted to a wide range of uses, including other employment uses.
So it could fold under the first one.
I think they're complementary. They're different things, but they're complementary, because we may have office buildings that are in the EX zone, for example, that are candidates for reuse to some other use. So one is specifically about the zone and what uses are allowed in the zone, and the other is the building and thinking about how do we remove whatever barriers exist to converting the building to be more flexible for a variety of uses.
And how about the housing one? Am I misreading that one? It feels like my take is that we already allow an enormous variety of uses downtown.
Yeah.
We don't have the right mix of uses downtown. So I'm trying to think of because I assume this project is like where to allocate staff time. So I'm trying to think, do we actually gain something by making it easy to do residential downtown when the zoning already allows it? We just don't have buildings with it. Does that make sense as a question?
Yeah, I think in some ways this, again, reflects other work that we're currently doing, and the project that you'll see next, the Central City Code Amendment Project. And so it's sort of reinforcing complementary recommendations about that. And I think you'll hear more about that project next month, but it really reflects more adjustments and refinements to the housing that we allow to enable more and to sort of unlock and address some of the feasibility issues that the current market faces.
Commissioner Spivak, just an additional note. Tom is correct in that some of these are identifying in some ways what's coming in that code project. And for that specific expanding housing in commercial areas, you will see in that code package, and the discussion draft is already out, for that there are areas that were like IG1, so that's kind of the lighter industrial, where we're actually considering zone changes to EX to allow the wider range of uses, including housing. So there's kind of every permutation of that that's being considered and that you will be looking at.
That helps, yeah, thanks. So, because on the east side of the river, I know that the area you're talking about. So like where the tree farm is, for example, that's EG zoning, I think. So I'll look at the packet, we'll see what it is. That helps, thanks.
I mean, I like the list, and, I think the future of the central city's obviously got to be a much more mixed-use environment, but I don't see anything on here about getting office workers into office buildings. I mean, I think the adaptive reuse stuff is impossible in some buildings or extremely expensive. But, you look at other large, medium-sized cities are doing better than we are in terms of office utilization. And so there's a lot of space that needs to be absorbed in the next couple of decades, and why not start now?
Yeah, I think this set of strategies reflects a lot of the work that has gone into this that I think in a very simple way shows that the best way to get office to return is to create nice places and to create active places.
Yeah,
and
so
one of
they come
those
back.
best strategies is to get people to live downtown.
Yeah.
And the more people are downtown, that's why not only are we tracking like housing unit built and commercial space, but we're tracking foot traffic as a metric, an indicator of are people returning to the central city, to downtown, and you sort of create that momentum, right? And if you work at all the strategies of why do people want to be downtown, and if there are a lot of people downtown, then, there's an office, maybe I want to locate in that nice area.
Yeah, I don't know.
I just wanted to say a couple of the strategies that interest me the most in terms of priority would definitely be expanding housing. I know I'm hearing what Vice Chair Spivak is saying, in that we have kind of the zoning code tools to allow it to be there, but I would be curious to see what strategies we can actually do to make it happen. I also have a question about unlocking catalytic reinvestment through targeted zoning changes. It says, to enable redevelopment on key opportunity sites where current regulations limit reinvestment and job growth. I'm just kind of curious if there's any example of what that kind of opportunity site is.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that was looking at places like the OMSI district or places in Central East Side right now that might need sort of targeted rezoning to unlock projects that we think could be coming.
And is that going to be kind of in tandem with like the OMSI redevelopment plan going on, or is that kind of a little more separate?
I'll jump in I think the way this is written, it's kind of combining a couple of different things. Even our housing production strategy that was adopted by this commission and council identify those catalytic sites as needing support from the city. Oftentimes it's kind of infrastructure support in order to facilitate those developments to happen. So OMSI is one of those sites. Broadway Corridor is one of those sites. I think this is, the zone changes, those don't need zone changes, really. There may be some zoning tweaks that are needed here and there, and, for example, the work we're doing in the Albina area is identifying that in order for, the city to realize kind of the vision that's part of the Albina Vision Trust Community Investment Plan, there may be some code tweaks, and so we're working on that as a process to identify some of those code tweaks. So I think what we're talking about here is there are other properties, other than those properties, that maybe are opportunity sites that we could be doing zone changes, and that's what will come with that Central City Code Amendment package. The catalytic sites, as we typically think of them, the projects that we know about that are out there but need additional support, those are not necessarily zone changes. Those are, like I said, those are more kind of, they need some infrastructure support. So there's sort of like a couple of different things wrapped up in this particular statement. And part of what you're uncovering here is that maybe we need to do some clarification of this particular strategy.
Right, but so it's safe to assume though that a lot of those opportunity sites are going to be within the central city area?
You will see that we will be introducing some of those through the central city, yes.
Yeah, just expressing, I think, support of just housing and how adaptive reuse really kind of goes in tandem with that. And I think part of the reimagining and reactivating a downtown, I think also has to do with areas outside of the scope of planning. But I think, I don't know if calling them out is appropriate, but just even things about perception or the actual dangers of downtown and things of that nature. I think that, as they may seem appropriate in this document, I think they might be worth stating.
Thanks. Yeah, we're, as you can tell, trying to stay more or less in a lane.
Yeah, just a quick comment, similar to the workforce development on the interim and pop-up uses. It's not so much a zoning barrier as it is like those tenant improvement incentives, the programs that can work with, the property owners, landlords to help attract. And I know there's a lot of conversation about vacancy tax right now as well. So maybe there's some dovetailing here where we can, better define and expand those resources available to landlords to attract and retain tenants in commercial spaces. And then just a comment on the adaptive reuse that is currently in the DRAC work plan as well. So I'm sure you're both, well aware that PP&D is looking at a subcommittee for continuing to explore what are the permitting and code barriers to office conversion. As was mentioned, a lot of it just comes down to the high cost for housing feasibility. So thank you for this great set of recommendations.
Sure, we can keep moving unless there's other comments on central. Oh,
Just have
sorry,
one,
yeah.
and that is to follow up, thank you, Commissioner Marion. Related to street level activity, I remember in the housing regulatory relief when we were looking at a 5-year moratorium on first floor commercial, and we had talked about, just want to elevate again the opportunity there, which is one, accessible housing, like accessible first floor housing, and finding ways to use that as a way to activate to have eyes on the street, as opposed to, I think, what could also easily happen, which is, they just, there's just an impermeability there. We also mentioned, and I know that this has to do with construction, but how to support live-work spaces on first floor, and is that an opportunity there? Thank you.
Moving into our neighborhood commercial districts, there's some overlap between some of the trends we're seeing in Central City in terms of, can we get a little more flexible? Can we allow light production as long as the impacts are minimal in those areas if you're wanting to roast and sell coffee, for example? Can we clarify the standards for non-conforming upgrades, at least so folks know kind of what they're getting into if they need to change a space? Again, kind of going back to the pop-up uses, are there other ways that we can make that more flexible or functional? The change of use requirements as well. Can we reduce any of those cost barriers? And then perhaps looking at community-led investment tools. So curious as to your thoughts if these kind of line up with what you've seen in business districts. Go ahead.
I have just a little bit of a question about the support for temporary and pop-up uses. I know this is kind of getting ahead of ourselves a little bit here, but if these pop-ups are successful and there's interest in them not being temporary, I would be curious if the city has any strategies or ideas about sustaining them and making them long-term permanent parts of it, especially if they are for mainly cultural and community uses.
Yeah, I think I'll just respond. I think, again, that goes back to the funding incentives. For example, we have a vacant commercial space at our Starlight building that I have partnered with a community theater group. They're doing pop-up theater. They're going to do Hamlet in May if anyone's interested. And well, I'm not charging them rent, because I would rather have the space activated, and they're a startup, they can't afford it. But I would love if they could be a long-term tenant. And so that's where that connection back to Prosper or other agencies that help fund both the landlord and the tenant for any additional improvements that are needed, or if they need, a cultural grant, for example, to keep things going. So I think it's less about the zoning than it is the resources for those organizations.
I'm curious, I see like investment. I wonder if like disinvesting or some way to like have folks who are sitting on properties that are, not, long term, have not been used. I don't know how much of that like has impact in like just the rest of a strip or like for example in Alberta we have like quite a few buildings that have just been there a really long time and kind of unused, and seems like there's not knowing much about the specifics and just more from anecdotally of like folks who maybe just there's no incentive for them to keep because perhaps there's not enough teeth that the city has put on you doing something with the building, or perhaps not enough opportunities for investments. And just I don't know if that's something to be interested in.
Yeah, as Commissioner O'Meara indicated, the city is currently looking at that sort of vacant space, not only in the downtown, but in the neighborhood commercial districts, and what programs the city could adopt to help support that activation. And the study itself goes beyond. It started with a question around a vacancy fee to sort of get the attention of property owners to find somebody to occupy this space. That study has since expanded to get into some of the issues that was raised around how do you finance tenant improvements and what are the barriers to activating these spaces. And not just fees, but what incentives could you offer to support that activation? And so that the results of that study will be coming out later this spring.
Okay, I have a lot. One, related to vacant spaces, a few years ago, probably several years ago at this point, we had, for the Shelter to Housing Continuum program project, we had asked as part of future work for the city to do an inventory of city-owned vacant or underutilized lots. Has that, I understand that's been completed. Where is that available?
Thank you for all the hard questions. No,
Oh,
I'm
thank
just
you.
kidding. Patricia
I've got
Diefenbaker
more.
for the
I've got
record.
more.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. No, I can definitely confirm that analysis has been done. I don't believe that the report has been published, but I do know that many bureaus that were involved in the development of that analysis have accessed and used the information for various undertakings. So for example, the Affordable Housing Opportunities Project, the rezoning of individual sites that you all saw recently and that was adopted by council upon your recommendation, that actually drew from that report, the analysis of city-owned sites. So I don't believe it's published, so I don't know that there's anywhere to access it specifically, but I do know that it has been used kind of as a layer of information that has informed various city efforts.
So it exists?
It exists, yes.
What is the reason for it not to be available to the public? Do you happen to know?
Honestly, I think it's just, on the list of things to do. It just never got completely finalized. I don't think there's any reason other than that.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I'll just put public records request. Oh, God. On my to-do list. Okay, great. Other bits. On behalf of a friend who has exceeded her 1-year anniversary of opening a coffee shop, has done zero construction and still is unpermitted because of a change of use corrections loop that she has been in for the last year, and has been technically operating unlawfully. Please reduce the cost barriers triggered by change of use requirements. I would put that at a tippy top. I also am curious, because I think that there's some aspects of, speaking from an East Portland perspective, there's a number of things that I think that I delight in from the central city that I think of, like, for example, the Gateway Shopping Center and some other, which, the Gateway Shopping Center is largely vacant. It's been on and off the market. It is the city's regional center, according to the Metro 2040 plan, except for downtown, and yet it sits vacant. So it's like, what, just want to put out for those strategically just mission critical parcels outside of the central city, how are we navigating that to ensure that has the investment and the development of political will that it needs in order to best support the neighborhoods around it. And I'm also just so thrilled, and again, Commissioner O'Mara, on the temporary pop-up uses, 100%, like the Centennial neighborhood has 0 coffee shops, and it relies on pop-up spaces. And so I would love, Apano got started on their development journey in part because of the Metro-owned furniture store on 82nd and Division, which they were able to occupy, and luckily they were large enough at that time to be able to carry their own liability insurance. But I would be really interested in, like, what are some of the non-infrastructural ways, for example, like conference of general liability support between property owner and tenant that could help with some of the smaller barriers, but the barriers that can keep some great community uses from activating an underserved neighborhood. I think that's all I have. I hope I've soft shoot enough that other people have thoughts.
You have a deep memory about that furniture store.
Oh, I'm just like,
I remember when I was really little, I think we got some beds or something there.
It's had quite an evolution. Other thoughts?
I'm wondering on the community-led district investment and management tools, is that, maybe someone already asked this question, sorry. Someone asked it. But like the local improvement districts. Is that what we're referring to, like the Central East
It's a version of
Side?
those, so it's a business improvement district.
Right, okay.
And/or, also a parking district
Sure, yeah.
where there's some revenue sharing that gets reinvested locally to support those types of programs.
Okay, thank you.
I think we can move to campus institutional areas. To your previous point about accessible jobs, I mean, what we've seen in the data, if you dig into the appendix a little more, is a lot of those accessible jobs for women have been more in the healthcare and education. So this kind of was an area we're hoping to lean into to see how we can continue to expand those kinds of jobs. So within our realm, we're looking at whether there's any way of streamlining campus zoning. I mean, we created this specific area not long ago, but whether there's any tweaks we could make. Can we incentivize densification? Can we kind of soften the edge with areas where these institutions start to blend in with those neighborhood districts? Can we kind of connect some of these larger institutions with workforce development? So they're hopefully allowing more of that accessible job growth. And then sometimes there are infrastructure constraints that are really holding up campus expansion, and whether we need to take a hard look at those. Any of these ideas, I don't know.
So this is going to be a question a little more out of ignorance. How much does the city work with institutions, particularly higher education institutions, on their master plans? I'm kind of thinking like PSU.
I think, well, like for PSU and what we did with the other campuses outside of the central city back in 2016 when we created the campus institution zones was really to, again, reduce the zoning code barriers to the implementation of their master plans, but it's still largely left up to the institutions themselves. And what Corinne was getting at is, 10 years ago, we created these zones. They seem to be working, but we haven't really checked in with the hospitals and colleges, especially outside the central city, to see how it's going, what more could we do to support their growth and development. And so I think that's a prompt to sort of revisit what we created, see how it's going, where they're getting hung up.
And I take it there's not really a lot of regional coordination, like metro area wide, when it comes to both public or private institutions and their planning?
Not in sort of organized, led by a public agency. I mean, I think it's largely left up to them. I think the colleges certainly are a lot of independent entities in and of themselves. Same with the hospitals, although there's different mergers and acquisitions going on there as well. But we largely leave it up to them to figure out what their needs are.
Yeah, I don't know how a strategy to make this happen would go then, but I think I would be interested if, especially depending on how much the city could actually involve itself in seeing kind of coordination between, because I know, especially also connecting it to the workforce development too, I think it'd make a big difference.
Yeah, and I think as with the industrial area, a lot of it comes down to what is the infrastructure surrounding these campuses? What are those needs? What's the public role to play in supporting those needs? Especially if you think about OHSU, getting in and out of South Waterfront or getting in and out of Markham Hill. There's a lot of sort of constraints on development that come with those locations where certainly the city and the region could play a role in facilitating that.
Just shows how long I've been on here, because I was on that project a long time ago. And thinking back on it now, it did seem very flexible, but also requiring a lot of planning foresight from the institution. They have to submit these plans of when they're going to be doing expansions or changes that might, if revisited, seem to be kind of burdensome, especially with turnover. Like, I'm sure Concordia had a big plan, but suddenly it's University of Oregon. Like, when changes happen, all the long-term planning is restarted. But
Well,
that's, yeah.
Through that project, we actually tried to narrow the focus of that long-term planning
Yeah.
to really be focused on the transportation impacts. And that we'd sort of raise the floor area and the building height what used to go in a lot of these 10-year master plans that they continually had to update. And so we really focused on, well, what are the external community impacts to that, and focused it on the transportation issues.
Okay.
I have not heard of a lot of issues with those transportation plans. It's not something that we have tracked to see how they've come in and what the issues have been.
It seems like a great thing. That's a good reminder, because even before that, it was even more burdensome before.
Yes.
We trimmed it down, and maybe it goes further. But it seems to make sense to do a check-in. But if it's not a problem, staff resources go elsewhere, it seems. I'm not sure this is like an economic driver it's like a flag for a eval. So
Yeah.
if it was something, I maybe put it lower on the list.
And I will say, this was a question that Chair Routh had emailed to us. When it comes to healthcare, the hospital campuses are a source of jobs, but that it's something like half of the healthcare jobs are not located on the hospital campuses. They're in clinics, they're in home rehab facilities, they're home health care. So the idea of growing the healthcare sector is not totally dependent on these hospital sites.
I would, thank you for that. If we're talking about prioritization, I would say connecting growing businesses to workforce development, it feels like everything else kind of falls from that. I know that also Mount Hood Community College, which I think has the only, am I correct in that it has the only crematorium and undertaking
Program?
program in the state? Okay, no one knows. Okay.
I think it has.
Not a
I was
growth
fascinated.
industry, or maybe it will be a growth industry with an aging population.
It also has the largest outdoor pool in the state of Oregon, I heard the other day, too,
Did
just
not
for note,
know.
yeah, for
Amazing.
the record.
And one other thing that the community college board has been considering is student housing. And I wonder, to the extent that we've had, if there is appetite or interest, because I know like PCC Southeast has been, working on a housing development. And Apano does not pay me, but like I'll stand Apano all day, that they've been working with PCC on that housing development to better utilize that land. But I'm curious if there's appetite and need to look at what even short-term housing looks like, campus adjacent. And I think of that in part because, my mom was a nurse, so some of this comes through that, professor of nursing at Linfield, that OHSU has had a program around working on getting folks, inspiring folks, particularly from rural communities throughout the state, to be interested in a healthcare profession and to come to Portland at OHSU. What does housing look like? To better support healthcare throughout the state, because we have this hub of institutional uses in Portland. That's all I got. Thank you.
Kind of goes right in hand with what you were saying, Chair Ralph. But yeah, I'll say as a student who likes to be housed, student housing really important, especially for when we want to activate those areas around institutions. That's the number one thing I hear all day, every day. Students complaining about needing more housing.
I believe Vice Chair Pollock has the shortest commute to our planning commission meetings.
There's one more.
One more category.
So if you do remember, there actually was quite a bit of growth that we saw in the residential areas when it comes to employment. And even though a lot of that is schools, nursing homes that happen to be in residential areas, there obviously are a lot of folks working out of their homes. It's been a big shift, whether that's hybrid employment or contractors, other folks just working directly out of their homes. So these were 4 areas that we were exploring, whether they would be worth some time looking into more in depth. So that's modernizing home-based business zoning, how many people can park or work out of a home, whether we could do more to enable detached workspaces on residential lots. That's, turning your garage into an office, et cetera. Maybe some support for folks, so promoting business permit navigator services if you are a small business trying to figure out how to operate out of your home. And then really targeting in on that child care and care economy and whether there needs to be more effort to support folks who are, again, almost changing their garage into a daycare facility. So thoughts on this one?
Well, I won't be surprised that I fully support the first one. I think that not only is it growing, but it's growing not following the rules that Portland currently has in place, where you can't have a single employee in your house without getting a type B permit. So I think that it's growing by people who are willing to not follow the rules, but if people who follow the rules, it might grow further. I think that's a priority, and I've tried to awkwardly slip it into other projects, but having a project about it would be great. I think that the detached workspaces could be part of the same thing. I mean, if the idea is to allow them to do an ACU, like a garage with a banner in front and selling retail, then it's its own thing. But if it's not, then I think it's the same project. You just allow someone to have their office in their garage or the house, who cares? If you can't see it from the street, it doesn't matter. So I would probably fold them together unless you're going as far as doing an ACU. And then I didn't really understand, the last one, I think is important, but I'm unclear whether Portland is the obstacle to this or whether it's, back when I studied this before, it was the state rules on licensure was the issue. If that's still the case, then it's an important issue, but it doesn't need to be on the list. But I don't know exactly the answer to that. I wouldn't want to in any way take it off the list if Portland could do something about it. But if we can't, then let's not claim we're going to address it. It's an advocacy to the state issue.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's a licensure issue. It could be a building code issue, but it could be more of an state advocacy item as where the city can weigh in.
I mean, it seems if it's a building code issue, that could be on this list. Is not just land use, so building code. If there really is a building code issue, let's name it that and put it on there. But but yeah, I think clarifying roles on that one would be good.
Yep.
Yeah. Thoughts?
Just kind of echoing Vice Chair Spivak, but like home-based business zoning and supporting for home-based childcare and care economy uses would be two of my top priorities. I can say based off my own personal experience and who I know a lot of people, especially young people, who get their starts probably, if I imagine, not doing it necessarily, following the rules exactly, but make money, doing hair, doing nails, childcare at home. And I think if we're talking about what's a good job for someone, and I think for a lot of people, it's being able to be there for their family, being able to be close nearby to their neighbors, their community. And that means a lot, especially, young working women, young single mothers, people who are, low income. So I think if we want to talk about equity and making sure people have more control over their lives and their economic output, this would be really important to me.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner.
I second Lucas Pollock's exact words.
On the business permitting navigator, is that something that would be offered through PP&D? Is that where that would probably live?
Yeah, I would
Yeah.
imagine.
It could be, or it could be the Prosper Portland's Small Business Assistance Program.
Okay. I think that's a great idea. One of the elements I'm advocating for on DRAC is that in general, for any homeowner or small business, that there's a liaison with permitting throughout the process to replicate what we see, for example, in affordable housing. We are assigned a liaison, which makes the process easier to navigate, but that resource is not available to every single type of permit. And as a homeowner who's also navigated it, I've been able to see sort of the difference in that experience. So I think it makes sense to have a dedicated business liaison if that could live at Prosper, but then also just in general, thinking about how do we provide more permitting support in sort of that liaison model at PP&D, because that could help across the board.
You made me think of one more, is that if we have, excuse me, the changes to the home-based business code, I hope people won't need to get permits nearly as often. I hope that a lot of stuff doesn't require a permit. Because if you're doing a home-based business, you rarely need to, people don't get permits now. I think there's a whole lot of home-based businesses that should be possible to do with zero permitting. There's a set of rules, just like you have to mow your yard, but anyway, so I would hope that there wouldn't be much need for this. In this setting, in other settings, absolutely, people need some hand-holding support for navigating bureaucracy. Hopefully, in this case, people can look at the criteria and say, oh yeah, I already do that. No permit needed.
All right.
Yeah, that's
We
it.
can, that's it for the strategies. Just to wrap up, I think, so most importantly, think about, are there any outstanding issues that you would like us to bring back on April 28th? Otherwise, what I'm going to preview for you is what to expect to see on May 12th. So again, the proposed recommendation goes through all these: repeal the old DOA, adopt the new one, do the comprehensive plan text amendments, repeal the old BLI for employment, adopt the new BLI. What you can see from us in terms of proposed revisions to the documents are, again, incorporating the steep slope. That's going to show up in the main document and the BLI that's Appendix B. The CCIL boundary adjustments, again, the main document and the BLI document. We'll add the Portland Harbor narrative to the main document. One of the things that we've come across is in both the main document and Appendix E, where we went through all of those 20-odd scenarios, like if you do high, medium, low, and all these different we are not able to reproduce all of that analysis with the 10% slope in the new CCIL. We just don't have that capacity. And so what we're proposing to do, and what you'll see in the document, is a note that says, hey, this scenario analysis was based on early information. It doesn't reflect the final recommendation. And just as a sort of word of warning to anybody looking at it, that the numbers aren't going to match. So that's our elegant compromise on how to keep that information in there, because the relative relationship between the scenario choices still matters. It's not the detailed numbers. You will see a new Appendix F that are those comprehensive plan text changes, just so it makes it easy as a recommendation and a motion and an ordinance to adopt the comp plan changes as shown in Appendix F. And I think last time we talked about the small sites and that development. We'll add some of that information and analysis to Appendix B to the BLI where that was most relevant, as deeper explanation of that issue. That'll show up in Appendix B. I think for the most part, you'll see that. That'll come to you as a recommended amendment, to adopt these changes as shown in the revised document. But again, if there are other issues that you want us to bring forward, I think it's speak now, or we're coming back with this package on May 12th.
Okay. All right.
All right?
Thank you so much. So between now and the 28th, there will be another tranche of
CCIL.
dense memo for CCIL. There will be clarification and different additional appendices. We will also have a draft of the CEI hub transmittal letter to you all, so please look at that. The economic opportunity analysis, your window is not completely closed, but it is diminishing rapidly. If you wish to add or subtract or modify anything, now would be and in the next few days would be an excellent time. In the tentative agenda on the website currently is tentative with a to be confirmed. We are confirming now that the economic opportunity analysis and the CCIL project will both be continued to our April 28th meeting. So that will happen. Anything else for the good of the order that I missed? Okay.
Chair Ralph, sorry,
Yes,
one
please.
clarification.
Yes, please.
Patricia Diefender for the record. So it's fine, we'll continue the EOA also to April 28th. Just wanted to note that potentially if no other issues come up between now and as we approach that date, it'll be on the agenda, but we may not take that topic up very deeply. We may just continue it again to May 12th. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
That sounds good. Yep. Okay. Thank you to staff. Thank you, Corinne and Tom. Thank you as always to Chief Planner Patricia Diefenderfer, to our wonderful Commission Clerk, Autumn Buckridge, and to Open Signal, who makes us look good, weirdly, online. Thank you all, and with that, we are adjourned.